The year is 800 AD, and the world stands on the threshold of transformation. In Europe, Charlemagne rules his sprawling dominion, while Viking longships probe distant shores. Across the Islamic world, the Abbasid Caliphate reaches its golden zenith in Baghdad. Yet far to the east, in the steaming river, deltas, and emerald rice paddies of tropical Asia, forces gather that will create one of history's most magnificent civilizations. The Mekong River winds like a great serpent through landscapes that seem crafted by the gods themselves. Each year, monsoon rains transform this ancient waterway into a highway of fertility, carrying rich sediment across vast floodplains that stretch beyond the horizon. When the waters recede, they leave behind soil so fertile that rice grows in abundance, creating surpluses that can feed armies, build temples, and sustain the dreams of kings. This is the stage upon which the Khmer realm will rise, a land of water and stone, of sacred mountains and endless fields, where human ambition will reshape both the physical and spiritual landscape of an entire region. The geography itself seems designed for nation building. The Great Lake of Tonle Sap acts as nature's own reservoir, expanding and contracting with the seasonal rhythms that govern all life in this tropical paradise. During the dry months, the lake shrinks to expose rich fishing grounds and fertile soil. When the rains come, it swells to 4 times its size, creating an inland sea that connects distant territories through navigable waterways. Rivers branch and merge like the veins of some vast organism, carrying not merely water, but the lifeblood of commerce, communication, and conquest. A chieftain who controls these waterways commands the movement of rice, salt, timber, and exotic goods that flow between the states of tropical Asia and the great trading centers of China and India. The monsoons themselves follow patterns as reliable as clockwork, yet as dramatic as any cosmic event. From May through October, warm winds from the southwest bring torrential rains that can drop 6 feet of water in a single season. The landscape transforms overnight. Dusty paths become rushing streams. Rice paddies turn into temporary lakes, and the very air grows thick with moisture and possibility. Then comes the dry season, when cool winds from the northeast bring clear skies and falling water levels. This is the time for construction, for warfare, for the great ceremonies that bind principalities together. The rhythms of wet and dry become the heartbeat of civilization itself, determining when temples rise, when armies march, and when kings are crowned. Long before the Khmer claim these lands, other peoples lay the foundations for the greatness that will follow. The trading state of Funan emerges in the 1st century AD, its monarchs mastering the art of hydraulic agriculture that will later reach its pinnacle at Angkor. Chinese chronicles speak of this wealth and sophistication, describing ports where merchants from across Asia gather to trade in gold, spices, and precious stones. The capital at Okeo bustles with activity that rivals any city in the known world. Roman coins mingle with Chinese silk in marketplace stalls, where a dozen languages create a constant babel of commerce. Indian traders bring not merely goods, but ideas. Sanskrit texts, Hindu cosmology, Buddhist philosophy, and architectural techniques that will transform how regional lords think about power, divinity, and the very purpose of kingship. The transformation runs deeper than mere cultural exchange. Local chieftains embrace the Indian concept of divine kingship, presenting themselves not as mere mortals, but as earthly manifestations of Hindu deities. They sponsor the construction of brick temples that mirror the cosmic order, creating sacred spaces where heaven and earth intersect through elaborate ritual ceremonies. Sanskrit becomes the language of administration and high culture, though local tongues persist in daily life. Brahmin priests arrive from India to perform the sacred rituals that legitimize royal authority, while Buddhist monks establish monasteries that become centers of learning and artistic innovation. The fusion creates something entirely new, a distinctly regional interpretation of Indian civilization that adapts foreign concepts to local realities. By the 6th century, centralized power begins to fragment as ambitious regional lords assert independence from central authority. The state splinters into competing principalities, yet the seeds of future greatness have been planted. Hydraulic engineering techniques spread throughout the region. Sanskrit literacy creates administrative systems capable of governing vast territories. Most importantly, the ideology of divine kingship provides a template for future warlords who dream of uniting these scattered lands under single rule. From this dissolution emerges Chenla, a more inland power that controls the middle reaches of the Mekong and its tributaries. Chenla's monarchs inherit these cultural innovations, while adding their own martial vigor and organizational skills. They extend hydraulic agriculture into previously marginal lands, creating the agricultural surplus that population growth and territorial expansion require. King Jayavarman, the first of Chenla, demonstrates the potential that effective leadership can unlock in this fertile region. His capital at Sambor Prey Kuk showcases architectural innovations that prefigure the glories of Angkor. Brick towers that soar toward the heavens, intricate stone carvings that blend Hindu iconography with local artistic traditions, and urban planning that accommodates both sacred and secular functions within carefully designed spatial arrangements. The temples of Sambor Prey Kuk reveal sophisticated understanding of religious architecture's role in projecting royal power. Each structure serves as both a dwelling place for the gods and a statement of human ambition. The towers rise in groups of 3, symbolizing the Hindu trinity, while creating visual rhythms that draw the eye upward toward divine realms. Stone lintels depict scenes from Hindu epics, but the artistic style remains distinctly Khmer, suggesting that cultural adaptation, rather than mere imitation, drives this civilization's development. Chenla's administrative system creates the governmental framework that later Khmer leaders will expand and refine. Provincial governors, appointed by the king, maintain order in distant territories, while ensuring that tribute flows steadily toward the capital. Royal inscriptions in Sanskrit record land grants, temple endowments, and legal decisions that establish precedents for future generations. A professional military maintains territorial integrity while standing ready to defend against external threats or internal rebellion. Yet Chenla, like its predecessor, eventually succumbs to the centrifugal forces that seem to tear apart every regional power. By the late 7th century, the realm splits into competing northern and southern halves, each claiming legitimate authority while warring against the other. Local strongmen carve out independent domains, reducing central authority to little more than ceremonial significance. The 8th century dawns on a fragmented landscape where dozens of petty chiefdoms compete for control over rice-growing regions, trade routes, and sacred sites. Warfare becomes endemic as ambitious warlords seek to expand their domains at their neighbors' expense. Diplomatic marriages create temporary alliances that dissolve when stronger opportunities arise. The sophisticated administrative systems of earlier periods give way to personal rule based on charisma, military success, and the ability to reward followers with land and plunder. Trade continues to flow along the great rivers, but political instability makes long-distance commerce increasingly hazardous. Merchant caravans require armed escorts to pass through territories controlled by rival warlords. temples and monasteries, stripped of royal patronage, struggle to maintain the religious and educational functions that earlier dynasties had supported so generously. Yet beneath this surface chaos, deeper currents prepare the way for the transformation that approaches. Hydraulic engineering techniques continue to spread as local commanders recognize that agricultural productivity determines military strength. Populations grow in regions where effective water management creates reliable food surpluses. Sanskrit learning persists in monastery schools, where monks preserve texts and traditions through periods of political upheaval. The ideology of divine kingship adapts to changed circumstances without losing its essential appeal. Local strongmen still claim supernatural sanction for their authority, sponsoring temple construction and religious ceremonies that link their earthly power to cosmic order. The physical infrastructure of Hindu-Buddhist civilization, temples, roads, irrigation works, urban centers, provides the foundation upon which future conquerors can construct their grander designs. In this world of endless warfare and shifting alliances, a new figure emerges whose vision will transform regional history. Prince Jayavarman, later known as Jayavarman II, grows to manhood during these turbulent decades, learning the harsh lessons that political fragmentation teaches. Sources suggest he spends years at the Javanese court of the Sailendra dynasty, observing how effective leaders manage to unify diverse territories under centralized authority. Java's experience offers both inspiration and warning. The Sailendras have created a maritime realm that spans the Indonesian archipelago, controlling trade routes between China and India while constructing magnificent Buddhist monuments like Borobudur. Yet their power depends on naval supremacy and commercial wealth, rather than the agricultural base that has always sustained mainland powers. Jayavarman studies these lessons carefully, recognizing that lasting dominion in his homeland requires control over rice-producing regions rather than mere commercial dominance. He observes how religious authority reinforces political power when leaders successfully present themselves as divine beings, worthy of absolute obedience. Most importantly, he learns that unity demands both military strength and ideological innovation, the ability to offer followers something more compelling than the petty chiefdoms they might otherwise serve. The prince's opportunity comes as the 9th century begins and political fragmentation reaches its most chaotic extreme. No single warlord commands enough territory to challenge determined opposition, yet none possesses the vision necessary to transcend traditional patterns of conquest and submission. Local populations grow weary of constant warfare that disrupts agricultural cycles and destroys the prosperity that peace might bring. Jayavarman returns from Java with plans that dwarf the ambitions of his rivals. Rather than simply adding territory to existing chiefdoms, he envisions creating something entirely new. A unified realm that brings all the Khmer-speaking peoples under divine authority that transcends traditional political boundaries. The concept represents a revolutionary departure from regional precedent, yet it builds upon centuries of cultural and technological development that have prepared the ground for such ambitious undertaking. The stage is set for transformation. Ancient river systems provide the geographical foundation for vast dominion. Hydraulic agriculture creates the economic base that extensive military campaigns will require. Hindu-Buddhist ideology offers the religious framework that can legitimize unprecedented concentrations of power. Most crucially, political fragmentation has created the very chaos that makes unity appear not merely desirable, but necessary for survival. As the year 802 approaches, all the elements for revolutionary change align like planets in some cosmic conjunction. The monsoons continue their eternal cycle, flooding the rice paddies that will feed imperial armies. Sanskrit learning preserves the administrative techniques that vast dominion requires. Temple architects perfect the skills that will create Angkor Wat. In monastery schools, young scribes learn to record the royal inscriptions that will proclaim divine kingship to a wondering world. The ancient trading states have laid the foundations. The fragmented present has revealed both the costs of disunity and the potential rewards that effective leadership might claim. From this fertile chaos, watered by monsoon rains and nurtured by human ambition, the greatest civilization in regional history prepares to rise. The jungle itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when a single man's vision will transform scattered chiefdoms into unified realm, when sacred mountains will echo with the chants of priests proclaiming divine authority, when the very stones will sing of Khmer glory that will endure for 6 centuries and inspire wonder for 1,000 years beyond. That moment approaches with the inevitability of the monsoon itself. Dawn breaks over Phnom Kulen, the sacred mountain where Jayavarman II will transform himself from ambitious prince into godly sovereign. The year is 802 AD, and the ceremony that unfolds atop this holy summit will echo through 6 centuries of imperial history. Brahmin priests chant Sanskrit verses as sacred fires consume offerings to the gods. Nobles from across the fractured land witness their new master's elevation to celestial status through the Devaraja ritual, the creation of a god-king whose power transcends all earthly challenge. The transformation is both spiritual and intensely practical. By declaring himself a living manifestation of Shiva, Jayavarman II claims legitimacy that no rival can match. Local warlords may control territory, command armies, or accumulate wealth, but none can claim direct communion with the cosmic forces that govern the universe itself. The prince has become something unprecedented in regional politics. A godly autocrat whose word carries the weight of sacred law. Sacred smoke rises from the mountaintop as the first monarch proclaims independence from all foreign overlords, particularly the Javanese Sailendra dynasty that has claimed suzerainty over much of the mainland. The declaration resonates beyond mere political statement. For the first time in generations, a single leader offers the people unity under celestial protection rather than subjugation to distant foreign powers. The message spreads through river valleys and rice paddies like wildfire. The age of fragmentation is ending. Jayavarman II's genius lies not merely in claiming godly status, but in systematically demonstrating that heavenly favor translates into earthly success. His armies sweep across the central plains, absorbing rival chiefdoms through a combination of armed pressure and ideological persuasion. Local commanders discover that resistance against a god-king invites not merely political defeat, but cosmic retribution. Surrender, conversely, offers both protection and participation in a grand enterprise that promises to restore prosperity and order to war-weary populations. The new sovereign establishes his capital at Hariharalaya, strategically positioned to control both the rice-producing heartland and the crucial water routes that connect distant territories. The site demonstrates sophisticated understanding of hydraulic geography, elevated enough to avoid seasonal flooding, yet close enough to major waterways to facilitate administration, defense, and economic development. Imperial engineers begin building the elaborate canal systems that will channel monsoon waters into vast irrigation networks. Temple building commences immediately, not as mere sacred gesture, but as calculated political strategy. Each brick tower that rises toward the heavens proclaims celestial presence in stone and mortar that skeptics cannot ignore. The monuments serve multiple functions. They house the gods who protect the realm, provide employment for thousands of craftsmen and laborers, demonstrate imperial wealth and power, and create permanent records of accomplishments through intricate stone carvings that will survive long after human memory fades. Administrative innovation keeps pace with spiritual development. Jayavarman II adapts the mandala system of governance that has proven effective throughout the region, but with crucial modifications that strengthen central control. Provincial governors owe their positions to court appointment rather than hereditary right, ensuring loyalty to the crown rather than local interests. These officials must maintain detailed records of population, agricultural production, and tribute obligations, creating bureaucratic accountability that previous dynasties never achieved. The king's armed organization reflects the same centralizing impulse. Rather than relying solely on feudal levies that local lords might withdraw during political crises, the imperial army includes professional units directly loyal to the crown. Elite regiments receive regular pay, standardized equipment, and training that transforms them into instruments of sovereign will rather than mere hired soldiers. War elephants, that most prestigious symbol of martial might, belong exclusively to the imperial forces. Economic policy demonstrates equal sophistication. The monarch recognizes that agricultural surplus provides the foundation for all other achievements: martial, sacred, artistic, or administrative. Imperial engineers systematically expand irrigation networks, transforming marginal lands into productive rice paddies that can support larger populations and generate tribute revenues. Water management becomes an imperial monopoly, ensuring that provincial lords remain dependent on central power for the irrigation systems that sustain their territories. Trade regulation creates additional revenue streams and extends imperial influence into distant markets. Merchants traveling through controlled territory must pay customs duties, purchase safe conduct passes, and conform to standardized weights and measures that facilitate commerce yet demonstrate sovereign control. The crown establishes trading posts at strategic locations, combining commercial profit with intelligence gathering about conditions in neighboring principalities. Sacred policy proves equally calculated. Though Jayavarman II presents himself as a Hindu deity, he carefully accommodates Buddhist traditions that have deep roots among the common people. Imperial temples include both Hindu and Buddhist elements, allowing worshippers from different traditions to participate in ceremonies that celebrate monarchical celestial status. The policy creates spiritual unity without forcing painful conversions that might provoke resistance. Sanskrit learning flourishes under court patronage, creating the literate administrative class that centralized government requires. Monastery schools train scribes, accountants, and legal scholars who can maintain the complex records that effective governance demands. These educated officials owe their positions to imperial favor rather than local connections, ensuring that their primary loyalty flows toward the crown rather than provincial interests. Architectural achievements during this foundational period establish patterns that will culminate in Angkor Wat 3 centuries later. Imperial temples combine sacred function with political symbolism, creating holy spaces that proclaim celestial power and demonstrate human achievement. The structures employ sophisticated engineering techniques, complex drainage systems, innovative foundation methods, and building logistics that coordinate the labor of thousands of workers over periods spanning multiple years. The Bakong Temple, completed under Jayavarman II's successor, Indravarman I, showcases the architectural ambitions that godly kingship inspires. This massive step pyramid rises like a man-made mountain, its 5 terraces representing the cosmic levels that separate earthly existence from celestial realms. Stone towers crown the summit, housing sacred images that transform the entire structure into a dwelling place for the gods. Every architectural element carries symbolic meaning and demonstrates technical mastery that rivals anything built elsewhere in the contemporary world. Indravarman I continues his predecessor's policies and adds innovations that strengthen the institutional foundations of godly monarchy. His reign witnesses the erection of the first great beret, the Indratataka, an enormous reservoir that demonstrates sovereign power over the natural forces governing agricultural productivity. The engineering challenge is immense, excavating millions of cubic feet of earth, building massive embankments that can withstand monsoon pressures, and creating distribution systems that channel stored water across hundreds of square miles of rice paddies. The Barre serves multiple purposes beyond mere irrigation. Its creation provides employment for thousands of workers during the dry season, when agricultural labor requirements diminish. The project demonstrates sovereign ability to mobilize resources on unprecedented scales, intimidating potential rivals and inspiring popular confidence in imperial competence. Most importantly, the reservoir ensures agricultural productivity even during drought years, protecting the realm against the natural disasters that have toppled previous dynasties. Campaigns under Indravarman I extend imperial control into regions that had remained independent during his predecessor's reign. The army employs combined arms tactics that coordinate infantry, cavalry, and elephant units in coordinated assault formations. Siege warfare capabilities allow systematic reduction of fortified positions that had previously provided refuge for rebellious local leaders. Naval forces control the waterways that serve as highways for both commerce and armed movement. Yasovarman I ascends the throne with ambitions that dwarf even his predecessor's achievements. His vision encompasses not merely political unification, but the creation of an entirely new capital that will serve as the earthly reflection of celestial cosmic order. The site he selects north of the existing capital possesses ideal geographical characteristics: elevated ground that provides natural defensive advantages, proximity to the Great Lake that facilitates trade and transportation, and access to stone quarries that will supply the building materials for monumental projects. The new capital of Yashodharapura represents urban planning on a scale unprecedented in regional history. Imperial engineers design a city that can accommodate hundreds of thousands of inhabitants and maintain clear hierarchical distinctions between court, noble, sacred, commercial, and residential districts. Broad avenues connect major temples and administrative complexes, creating ceremonial routes for imperial processions that will display godly majesty to assembled populations. Market areas provide designated spaces for commerce and ensure that economic activity remains under sovereign supervision. Water management within the capital demonstrates engineering sophistication that rivals contemporary achievements anywhere in the world. Complex canal systems bring fresh water into the city and carry away waste products that could threaten public health. Artificial ponds and reservoirs provide water storage for dry season consumption and create aesthetic features that enhance the capital's beauty. Elaborate drainage systems prevent flooding during monsoon periods and ensure adequate water retention for year-round urban requirements. The Lole Temple marks Yasovarman Paru's first major sacred edifice, built on an artificial island within his predecessor's great reservoir. The location symbolizes celestial mastery over natural forces. The God King literally rises above the waters that sustain all life. The temple's architectural features demonstrate artistic evolution that incorporates lessons learned from previous imperial monuments and pioneers innovations that will influence centuries of subsequent development. Phnom Bakheng, Yasovarman's greatest achievement, establishes the template for temple mountains that will culminate in Angkor Wat. This massive structure rises from a natural hill that imperial engineers reshape into perfect geometric form. 7 terraces ascend toward a central tower that represents Mount Muru, the cosmic mountain where Hindu gods reside. The mathematical precision underlying the temple's proportions reflects sophisticated understanding of sacred symbolism, architectural engineering, and astronomical observation. Building Phnom Bakheng requires organizational capabilities that transform imperial administration into something resembling a modern state apparatus. Thousands of workers must be recruited, trained, housed, fed, and supervised over periods spanning multiple years. Stone blocks weighing several tons must be quarried, transported, and positioned with precision that allows no margin for error. Skilled craftsmen must coordinate their efforts to create architectural elements that function both structurally and symbolically. The temple's symbolic program celebrates monarchical celestial power and creates sacred space for ceremonies that bind the population to their god-king. Elaborate stone carvings depict scenes from Hindu mythology, but artistic styles remain distinctly regional rather than merely copying Indian models. The iconographic program proclaims that universal celestial principles find their perfect earthly expression through imperial sovereignty. Economic expansion accompanies architectural achievement as court policies stimulate population growth and territorial development. New irrigation systems bring previously marginal lands under cultivation, increasing both agricultural production and the tax base that funds sovereign projects. Trade networks extend imperial influence into distant markets and generate customs revenues that supplement agricultural tribute. Craft production flourishes under court patronage, creating luxury goods that enhance prestige and provide employment for skilled artisans. Armed organization evolves to meet the challenges of governing an increasingly complex state that spans diverse geographical regions and ethnic groups. Professional units develop specialized capabilities: elephant cavalry for battlefield shock action, infantry formations trained in siege warfare techniques, naval forces equipped for riverine operations, an engineering corps capable of erecting both fortifications and civilian infrastructure projects. Diplomatic relationships with neighboring powers demonstrate growing confidence and international recognition. Imperial embassies exchange gifts and establish trade agreements with the Chinese imperial court, which formally acknowledges sovereignty and offers protection against common enemies. Similar relationships develop with Indian Ocean trading networks that recognize the realm as a significant regional power worthy of respectful treatment. Sacred developments during this foundational period establish institutional frameworks that will survive political upheavals for centuries to come. Imperial temples become centers of learning, where monks and Brahmin priests preserve Sanskrit literature, develop astronomical knowledge, and train the educated administrators that complex government requires. These institutions accumulate vast land holdings through sovereign grants, creating economic foundations that ensure their long-term survival. Cultural synthesis accelerates as civilization absorbs influences from India, China, and local traditions, and creates distinctly original artistic and intellectual achievements. Sculpture develops characteristic features that distinguish imperial monuments from their Indian prototypes. Architecture incorporates local materials and building techniques and adapts foreign symbolic programs to regional spiritual requirements. Literature emerges that employs Sanskrit literary forms to celebrate distinctly local themes and historical accomplishments. As the first century of godly monarchy draws to a close, The institutional foundations for 6 centuries of regional dominance have been firmly established. The Mandala administrative system ensures effective governance across vast territories and maintains central control. Economic policies generate the agricultural surpluses and trade revenues that fund expansion and monumental building. Sacred institutions legitimize political power and preserve the cultural traditions that bind diverse populations into unified political communities. The stage is set for the golden age that approaches. Future monarchs will build upon the foundations that Jayavarman II and his immediate successors have created, erecting temples that dwarf Phnom Penh and extending control across territories that encompass much of modern-day Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and Myanmar. The hydraulic agriculture systems will expand to support populations exceeding 1 million inhabitants. The sacred architecture will evolve toward the ultimate masterpiece of Angkor Wat. Yet the essential elements are already in place by the year 1000 AD. Godly kingship provides the ideological framework for absolute monarchy. Administrative institutions ensure effective governance across diverse territories. Armed organization maintains internal order and deters external threats. Economic policies generate the surpluses that monumental achievements require. Sacred establishments legitimize political power and preserve cultural traditions. The sacred mountain has become a sacred state. The foundations have been laid for architectural wonders that will inspire amazement for a millennium. The age of expansion beckons, promising achievements that will establish the people as creators of one of humanity's most magnificent civilizations. The year 1006 AD arrives with monsoon rains that flood the rice paddies surrounding a capital already transformed beyond recognition. Suryavarman I prepares to ascend the throne of an empire, poised to achieve greatness that will eclipse all previous accomplishments. Suryavarman I ascends the throne in 1006 AD with ambitions that stretch far beyond his predecessor's dreams. Where earlier monarchs had unified the heartland and established administrative foundations, this new sovereign envisions dominion spanning from the South China Sea to the Bay of Bengal. His very name, protected by the sun, proclaims cosmic destiny that will transform regional balance forever. Palace scribes record tribute flowing into the capital from territories that previous generations could barely imagine controlling. Vassals arrive bearing gifts from the mountains of Champa, the forests of present-day Thailand, the trading ports of the Malay Peninsula, and the delta regions of what will become southern Vietnam. War elephants trumpet in vast enclosures that house more than 1,000 of these magnificent beasts. Treasury chambers overflow with gold, silver, precious stones, exotic woods, rare spices, and tribute goods that demonstrate the reach of sovereign power throughout Southeast Asia. Suryavarman I's genius lies in recognizing that sustainable expansion requires more than mere conquest. His campaigns systematically dismantle existing power structures only to rebuild them under royal oversight. Local chieftains who submit willingly retain ceremonial positions within the Mandala hierarchy, but real authority flows through appointed governors who report directly to the capital. Resistant warlords face annihilation, their territories redistributed to loyal supporters who understand that their prosperity depends entirely on court favor. The king's administrative reforms create governmental machinery sophisticated enough to manage an empire spanning millions of square miles and diverse populations speaking dozens of languages. Sanskrit remains the official language of administration, but local scribes must master both their native tongues and the court standard. Tax collection becomes systematized through detailed records that track agricultural production, craft manufacturing, and commercial activity in every district. Census taking provides population data that enables efficient resource allocation and military recruitment. Trade policy transforms scattered regional markets into an integrated economic system that generates unprecedented wealth for the sovereign treasury. Standardized weights, measures, and currency eliminate the commercial confusion that had plagued earlier periods. Royal trading posts establish fixed exchange rates and guarantee safe passage for merchant caravans traveling established routes. Customs duties provide steady revenue streams, but the crown also profits by monopolizing trade in the most valuable commodities: precious stones, exotic woods, rare spices, and luxury manufactured goods. Water management expands beyond anything previously attempted in human history. The Great Western Barai, completed during Suryavarman III's reign, stretches 8 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide, storing enough water to irrigate hundreds of thousands of acres during the dry season. Engineering this massive reservoir requires moving 50 million cubic meters of earth, an undertaking that employs tens of thousands of workers over multiple seasons and demonstrates organizational capabilities that rival modern infrastructure projects. The Baray system creates agricultural productivity that can support population densities exceeding anything achieved elsewhere in the medieval era. Rice yields increase dramatically when farmers can rely on controlled water supplies rather than depending entirely on monsoon timing. Multiple harvests become possible in some regions, generating food surpluses that free substantial portions of the population for non-agricultural pursuits. Craft specialization flourishes as artisans, merchants, soldiers, administrators, and clergy can dedicate themselves entirely to their chosen professions. Urban planning at the capital reaches unprecedented sophistication as the city expands to accommodate populations that may exceed 1 million inhabitants. Residential districts spread outward from the ceremonial center according to carefully planned hierarchies that reflect social status through building styles, plot sizes, and proximity to sacred monuments. Merchant quarters cluster near major shrines where commercial activity concentrates during festivals. Craft districts organize by specialty: metal workers, textile producers, stone carvers, wooden furniture makers, and ceramics manufacturers, each occupying designated neighborhoods. Transportation infrastructure connects the capital to distant provinces through networks of roads, canals, and river routes that facilitate both administrative communication and commercial exchange. Stone bridges span major waterways, using engineering techniques that combine practical function with symbolic decoration. Rest houses positioned at regular intervals provide accommodation for official messengers, merchant caravans, and pilgrims traveling to sacred sites. Way stations stock supplies and maintain postal relays that enable rapid communication throughout controlled territories. Sacred building during Suryavarman, one's reign achieves new levels of sophistication that prepare the ground for the masterpieces that will follow. The Preah Vihar complex, perched dramatically on a cliff overlooking the surrounding plains, demonstrates royal ability to overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Building materials must be transported up steep mountain paths, yet the finished structures rival anything built on level ground. The complex's layout follows astronomical alignments that reflect sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics and sacred symbolism. Creative achievement keeps pace with engineering innovation, as sculptors, painters, and decorative craftsmen develop distinctly local styles that synthesize foreign influences with indigenous traditions. Stone carving reaches technical perfection that enables incredibly detailed narrative reliefs covering vast wall surfaces. Bronze casting produces statuary and practical objects of extraordinary beauty and precision. Textile production creates silk fabrics whose quality rivals contemporary Chinese and Indian manufactures. Military organization evolves to meet the demands of governing territories, spanning diverse geographical conditions and ethnic populations. Professional armies include specialized units trained for specific combat environments, mountain warfare specialists for campaigns in the Cardamom and Dangrek ranges, naval forces equipped for operations on the Great Lake and major rivers, cavalry formations optimized for operations in the Central Plains, and siege engineers capable of reducing fortified positions using both traditional assault techniques and innovative mechanical devices. Elephant corps reach unprecedented size and sophistication as royal armies deploy these magnificent animals in coordinated formations that can dominate any battlefield. Elite mahots undergo years of training to develop the skills necessary for managing war elephants in combat conditions. Specialized equipment includes armored howdahs that protect riders, spiked shields that enhance the animal's natural weapons, and coordinated signal systems that enable complex tactical maneuvers. Enemy forces lacking comparable elephant capabilities discover that conventional infantry and cavalry units cannot withstand determined elephant charges. Intelligence networks provide information about conditions throughout the empire and beyond its borders. Royal agents pose as merchants, pilgrims, scholars, and diplomatic envoys to gather strategic intelligence about rival powers, trade opportunities, and potential threats. Systematic information collection enables planners to identify emerging problems before they become serious challenges and to exploit opportunities that might otherwise remain hidden. The intelligence apparatus also monitors internal conditions, identifying provincial governors who might be developing treasonous ambitions, or regions where popular discontent could threaten stability. Educational institutions flourish under court patronage, as the Crown recognizes that effective governance requires trained administrators, skilled craftsmen, and learned specialists in law, medicine, astronomy, and engineering. Sacred schools teach literacy in Sanskrit, Khmer, and often additional languages relevant to specific regions. Advanced instruction covers mathematics, astronomy, legal principles, administrative procedures, and technical subjects like hydraulic engineering and building design. Scholarship in studies, philosophy, literature, and historical chronicles creates intellectual achievements that rival contemporary developments in China, India, and the Islamic realm. International relations demonstrate the empire's emergence as a major regional power that commands respect from distant courts. Chinese emperors acknowledge sovereignty through formal diplomatic exchanges that include valuable gifts and respectful correspondence. Trade relationships extend over the Indian Ocean to ports in India, Ceylon, and even the Persian Gulf. Diplomatic marriages create alliance networks that extend influence without requiring expensive military campaigns. Cultural synthesis reaches new heights as local traditions absorb influences from around Asia, while maintaining distinctive characteristics that mark these achievements as unmistakably regional. Hindu practices adapt to local spiritual traditions, creating unique ceremonial forms that honor both universal principles and ancestral customs. Buddhist institutions develop along similar lines, producing art and literature that reflects both Indian philosophical traditions and indigenous sensibilities. The result is a civilization that participates fully in broader Asian cultural networks while maintaining clear distinctive identity. Economic diversification reduces dependence on agricultural tribute as craft production. Trade revenues and tribute from distant vassals create multiple revenue streams. Luxury manufactures, silk textiles, bronze artifacts, Carved wooden objects, jewelry, and decorative ceramics find markets throughout Asia. Raw material exports include precious woods, gemstones, aromatic resins, and rare spices that command premium prices in distant markets. The economy becomes increasingly monetized as standardized currencies facilitate complex commercial transactions. Legal systems develop sophisticated procedures for resolving disputes, enforcing contracts, and maintaining social order among territories inhabited by populations following different customary traditions. Royal law codes establish uniform standards for major crimes and commercial transactions, but local communities retain authority over matters governed by ancestral customs. Appellate procedures enable cases to be reviewed by higher authorities when local decisions prove unsatisfactory. Legal education trains judges and advocates who can navigate the complex relationships between royal law, sacred law, and customary traditions. Social mobility increases as expansion creates opportunities for talented individuals regardless of their birth circumstances. Military service offers advancement prospects for young men with courage and competence. Administrative positions become available to those who demonstrate literacy, mathematical skills, and practical judgment. Craft specialization rewards technical expertise and creative ability. Sacred institutions provide alternative career paths for those called to spiritual pursuits. While social hierarchies remain clearly defined, the empire's rapid growth creates unprecedented opportunities for ambitious individuals. Women's roles expand significantly as economic development creates new occupations, and policy requires administrative capabilities that transcend traditional gender limitations. Female merchants operate successfully in many markets, particularly those involving luxury goods and textiles. Some women achieve prominence as specialists, medical practitioners, and creators. Palace administration includes numerous female officials who manage ceremonial functions, treasury operations, and communication with provincial governors' wives. While formal political power remains concentrated among men, women exercise considerable influence through informal networks and specialized professional roles. As Suryavarman Menemund's long reign draws to a close, the empire has achieved a level of prosperity, territorial extent, and cultural sophistication that surpasses anything previously accomplished in Southeast Asian history. The foundations laid during the previous century have supported expansion that transforms the region's balance of power. Administrative institutions function efficiently over vast distances and diverse populations. Economic policies generate wealth that funds both practical infrastructure and monumental achievements. Military capabilities ensure internal order while deterring external threats. Yet even greater accomplishments await as Suryavarman II prepares to ascend the throne, with visions that will produce humanity's most magnificent monument. The new monarch's ambitions encompass not merely political dominion, but the creation of masterpieces that will serve as earthly reflections of cosmic perfection. Sacred building will reach unprecedented scales, as royal patronage supports projects requiring decades of sustained effort and employing thousands of skilled craftsmen. Suryavarman II's coronation in 1113 AD marks the beginning of the most culturally productive period in history. His devotion to Vishnu inspires projects that will culminate in the Great Sanctuary, the supreme achievement of classical building that combines symbolism with beauty and engineering innovation on scales never before attempted. The young monarch's vision encompasses creating monuments worthy of the gods themselves, structures that will proclaim glory for all eternity. Sacred planning begins immediately as court architects study texts, astronomical observations, and precedents to design monuments that will surpass all previous achievements. The great complex will occupy an area larger than many contemporary cities, its creation requiring precision engineering, creative vision, and organizational capabilities that challenge human limitations. Stone carving will cover thousands of square meters, with narrative reliefs depicting stories, historical events, and mythological scenes of extraordinary beauty and detail. Spiritual devotion inspires achievement, as Suryavarman II's Vaishnavite beliefs influence programs that celebrate Vishnu's cosmic role while proclaiming divine authority. Layouts follow mathematical principles derived from cosmology, creating sacred spaces that function simultaneously as dwelling places for the gods and demonstrations of human devotion. Sculptural programs integrate education with beauty, making visits educational experiences that reinforce both spiritual beliefs and political loyalty. Water management achieves new sophistication, as engineers design moat systems that serve both practical and symbolic functions around major complexes. The Great Moat spans 190 meters wide and contains enough water to eliminate fire hazards while creating aesthetic effects that enhance the monument's visual impact. Similar water features at other sites demonstrate that engineers have mastered hydraulic techniques that enable ambitious projects while serving practical requirements for building and maintenance. Craft guilds organize production of the specialized materials that monumental creation requires. Stone carvers develop techniques for working the local sandstone that enables incredibly detailed relief sculpture covering vast wall surfaces. Bronze casters produce statuary and practical objects of extraordinary quality. Woodworkers create elements and ceremonial objects using techniques that rival contemporary achievements anywhere. Textile workers produce silk fabrics and decorative materials for ceremonies and court functions. Transportation logistics coordinate the movement of materials from distant quarries to building sites through networks of roads, canals, and river routes specifically designed to serve needs. Stone blocks weighing several tons travel hundreds of kilometers from quarry sites, using techniques that combine traditional methods with innovations developed for these unprecedented projects. Timber from distant forests arrives through river networks that require careful coordination with seasonal water levels and monsoon timing. Labor organization coordinates the efforts of thousands of workers representing dozens of different specialties and skill levels. Master craftsmen train apprentices in techniques passed down through generations while adapting traditional methods to meet new challenges. Unskilled laborers perform the heavy work of moving materials and preparing sites. Administrative personnel coordinate supplies, wages, work schedules, and quality control. The result is organizational achievement that rivals modern projects in complexity and exceeds them in creative ambition. International recognition increases as achievements attract attention from around Asia and beyond. Chinese travelers write detailed accounts of the capital's magnificence that circulate widely among educated elites. Indian scholars acknowledge that building has achieved levels of sophistication that rival achievements in the subcontinent. Islamic traders carry reports of wealth and cultural sophistication to markets over the Indian Ocean and beyond. Cultural flowering encompasses literature, music, dance, and theatrical performance as royal patronage supports development in all creative fields. Court poets compose works in Sanskrit and Khmer that celebrate achievements while contributing to regional literary traditions. Musical composition and performance reach new levels of sophistication as court musicians develop instrumental and vocal techniques that enhance ceremonies and court entertainments. Dance and theatrical traditions evolve under patronage, creating performance styles that remain distinctively regional while incorporating influences from around Asia. The Golden Age reaches its zenith as Suryavarman II's vision transforms into stone reality. The great sanctuary rises like a mountain crafted by hands, its towers reaching toward the heavens, while its foundations extend deep into the earth that nourishes all life. Every element serves both practical and symbolic functions, creating spaces that facilitate worship while demonstrating human capability to create beauty that rivals natural wonders. As the monument nears completion, confidence reaches heights that will never again be equaled. The structure stands as proof that human devotion, creative vision, and engineering skill can collaborate to produce achievements worthy of the gods themselves. Stone carved with infinite patience depicts stories that will educate and inspire visitors for centuries to come. Mathematical precision underlying the proportions reflects understanding of cosmic principles that govern earthly existence. The empire stands at its historical peak, commanding territories that encompass much of Southeast Asia, while achieving cultural heights that establish permanent places in human memory. The great sanctuary prepares to welcome its first worshippers, pilgrims who will marvel at beauty that surpasses anything they could have imagined possible. The Golden Age has produced its masterpiece, a monument that will inspire wonder and devotion long after the empire that created it has faded into memory. The death of Suryavarman II in 1150 AD shatters the Golden Age like thunder, splitting a clear sky. No heir apparent emerges with undisputed claim to the throne, leaving the realm that had achieved unprecedented glory suddenly vulnerable to the succession crises that have toppled previous dynasties. Court factions form around rival claimants, each asserting divine legitimacy while maneuvering for support among regional governors, commanders, and powerful nobles whose allegiances will determine the nation's future. Three primary contenders emerge from the chaos, each representing different power bases within the fractured state. Prince Tribhuvanadityavarman controls the eastern regions, drawing support from Cham-influenced communities and officers who had served in the recent campaigns against Champa. Prince Yasovarman II commands loyalty in the northern districts, where Thai-speaking groups and Mon communities favor his promises of greater regional autonomy. A third claimant, supported by the traditional Brahmin establishment and bureaucratic officials, attempts to maintain continuity with established governance practices. Palace intrigue explodes into open warfare as competing princes mobilize their supporters throughout areas spanning hundreds of thousands of square miles. The mandala system that had ensured efficient governance during times of strong leadership now becomes a weakness, as regional administrators must choose between conflicting loyalties. Governor Mahidarapura in the western districts declares for Yasovarman II, mobilizing Mon forces that had historically resented royal control. Eastern commander Vijayendravarman supports Tribhuvanadityavarman, calculating that enemy naval expertise provides crucial advantages in riverine warfare. The succession struggle reveals fundamental tensions that prosperity had previously concealed. Regional ethnic groups begin asserting distinct identities that challenge the cultural unity that earlier monarchs had carefully cultivated. Mon communities in the West revive memories of their independent heritage under leaders like Anavrata's descendants, who maintain connections with pagan in Burma. Enemy settlements in the East organize under local chiefs who question why they should remain subordinate to Hindu rulers, when their Islamic and traditional beliefs differ fundamentally from court practices. Thai-speaking peoples in the northern areas rally around emerging leaders like Phokun Bang Klang Thao, who will later establish the foundations of Thai independence. These groups had been incorporated through conquest rather than cultural assimilation, and war provides opportunities to assert ethnic autonomy. Local chieftains organize war bands that control crucial mountain passes and river crossings, effectively cutting communication between the heartland and northern districts. Governmental breakdown accelerates as the Mandala system proves unable to function without unified command. Regional governors, who had operated efficiently under clear hierarchical structures, find themselves paralyzed when competing claimants issue contradictory orders. Tax collection becomes chaotic as local officials cannot determine which power should receive revenues. Some administrators attempt to remain neutral by withholding tribute from all claimants, while others openly declare independence and redirect regional resources to personal enrichment. The sophisticated bureaucratic apparatus that had managed a realm stretching from the South China Sea to the Bay of Bengal crumbles under the weight of competing loyalties. Sanskrit-educated bureaucrats who had maintained detailed records of population, agricultural production, and tribute obligations abandon their posts as career prospects disappear. Legal systems break down when courts cannot determine which laws apply or which power can enforce judicial decisions. Regional archives containing centuries of precedents burn as local strongmen eliminate evidence of royal control. Commercial disruption follows chaos as trade routes become unsafe and networks fragment. The Mekong River system that had served as the realm's commercial highway transforms into a series of contested waterways controlled by rival warlords. Merchant caravans traveling from the capital to the great port of Hoi An require armed escorts through areas where bandits and competing armies pose constant threats. Transport costs increase dramatically as traders must pay multiple tolls and protection fees to various powers. Currency standardization dissolves as different regions issue their own coins or return to barter systems that complicate long-distance commerce. The silver standards that had facilitated exchange throughout Southeast Asia give way to local weight systems and commodity exchanges. Chinese merchants, who had established permanent trading posts throughout the realm, begin withdrawing their operations as commercial security deteriorates. Indian Ocean networks redirect shipping to more stable ports in Java and Sumatra. The great hydraulic systems that had supported agricultural productivity for centuries begin to deteriorate under neglected maintenance. The Western Barre, that magnificent 8-kilometer reservoir completed under Jayavarman, requires constant attention to prevent silting and embankment erosion. Internal warfare diverts the labor gangs and engineering expertise necessary for maintaining these complex systems. Canal networks throughout the heartland suffer structural damage as competing armies destroy infrastructure to deny resources to their enemies. Rice yields decline dramatically as irrigation becomes unreliable, reducing the food surpluses that had freed large groups for non-agricultural pursuits. Farmers in contested areas abandon their fields rather than risk becoming casualties in operations. The multiple harvests that had generated unprecedented prosperity become impossible when water management systems fail. Famine spreads through regions that had previously exported surplus grain to distant markets. Craft production suffers as skilled artisans flee war zones or find themselves pressed into service. The workshops around Angkor that had produced magnificent sculptures, bronzes, and textiles for markets throughout Asia close as patronage disappears and raw materials become unavailable. Master craftsmen who had spent decades perfecting techniques for working local sandstone abandon their trades to become soldiers or refugees. The knowledge systems that had supported architectural achievement scatter as educational establishments shut down. International prestige plummets as foreign courts witness the realm's internal dissolution. Chinese diplomatic records from the Song dynasty chronicle the breakdown of regular tribute missions that had demonstrated stability for generations. The imperial annals note that the realm of Zhenle has fallen into great disorder, with multiple princes claiming power while none can control the whole territory. Exchange relationships with Indian Ocean networks suffer as merchants seek more stable partners in Java, Sumatra, and Ceylon. The court at Angkor Thom, once the center of a magnificent civilization that attracted visitors from throughout Asia, becomes a shadow of its former self. Palace revenues decline as tribute stops flowing from rebellious areas. The royal workshops that had employed thousands of craftsmen producing luxury goods close for lack of patronage and materials. Court ceremonies that had displayed divine majesty become hollow pageants performed before diminished audiences. Jayavarman II eventually emerges victorious from the succession struggle through a combination of success and accommodation, but his triumph comes at enormous cost. The new monarch inherits regions ravaged by years of warfare, depleted treasuries, damaged infrastructure, and deeply divided groups. His power remains contested in many areas, where local strongmen like the Khmer governor Jayavarman maintain semi-independent control over crucial rice-producing districts. The king attempts to restore command through systematic campaigns that reassert control over rebellious areas. The campaign against Mon strongholds in the western districts requires siege warfare techniques that devastate local communities. The reduction of Lavo, a key regional center, involves months of systematic assault that leaves the city's infrastructure in ruins. These expeditions achieve tactical success, but strain resources already depleted by internal conflict, requiring enormous expenditures for equipment, provisions, and soldier pay, while generating little revenue beyond whatever plunder can be seized. Sacred power suffers as the war undermines popular belief in divine kingship. If the monarch truly possesses cosmic legitimacy, skeptics throughout the realm ask, why do the gods permit such devastating internal conflicts? Temple maintenance deteriorates as royal patronage declines, and wealthy donors redirect their contributions to immediate necessities. The Bayon, that magnificent temple mountain, begun under earlier monarchs, remains unfinished as resources flow to more urgent requirements. Some sacred establishments attempt to remain neutral in conflicts, but this neutrality itself becomes controversial as competing factions demand active support for their causes. Buddhist monasteries that had flourished under royal patronage find themselves caught between rival claimants seeking legitimacy. Hindu shrines that had served as centers of divine worship become strongholds, as competing armies recognize their strategic value. Sacred sculptures and inscriptions suffer deliberate destruction, as enemies attack symbols associated with their rivals. The neighboring realm of Champa, itself recovering from earlier defeats at the hands of Jayavarman II, recognizes an unprecedented opportunity to reverse decades of humiliating subordination. King Jayavarman, the fourth of Champa, organizes systematic intelligence-gathering operations that reveal the full extent of internal division. Enemy agents posing as merchants travel throughout the realm, mapping dispositions, identifying potential allies among disaffected groups, and locating strategic targets for future operations. Naval preparations demonstrate sophisticated understanding of riverine warfare that will prove crucial in upcoming campaigns. The realm's shipyards produce specialized warboats designed specifically for operations on the Mekong system and its tributaries. These vessels, lighter and more maneuverable than the transport barges used throughout the territory, carry bronze cannons and specialized weapons designed for close-quarters combat. Enemy commanders study current patterns, seasonal water levels, and defensive installations throughout the river networks. Cultural identity provides additional motivation for preparations, as the realm's rulers present their planned campaigns as liberation struggles designed to free ethnic communities from foreign domination. This ideological framework resonates with groups throughout the eastern areas that had maintained distinct languages, customs, and practices despite integration into the realm. Local communities in regions like Panduranga and Vijaya maintain secret communication with agents, providing intelligence and logistical support that enhances effectiveness. The realm's response to threats reveals the extent of its decline. Professional armies that had once dominated regional battlefields struggle to coordinate effective counterattacks when commanders refuse to cooperate with planning. Equipment shortages force soldiers to fight with inferior weapons and inadequate protection as production centers fall under local control. Supply systems that had reliably supported extended campaigns break down, leaving armies dependent on local foraging that alienates civilian groups. Strategic coordination that had enabled complex multi-front operations becomes impossible as competing claimants refuse to share intelligence or coordinate defensive measures. When enemy raids probe the eastern defenses, Western governors decline to send reinforcements, calculating that their forces might be needed to defend against internal enemies. The sophisticated command structures that had managed campaigns throughout vast areas fragment into isolated regional commands with conflicting objectives and limited capabilities. Naval warfare presents particular challenges as the realm's river fleets prove inadequate against maritime capabilities developed specifically for Southeast Asian conditions. The Great Lake of Tonle Sap and major rivers that had facilitated internal communication now become highways for enemy penetration. Enemy warboats, designed for speed and maneuverability in shallow waters, consistently outperform the heavier vessels that had been optimized for cargo transport rather than combat operations. Shore defenses that had protected key ports and trading centers prove vulnerable to sustained assault by forces employing both traditional siege techniques and innovative naval tactics. The fortifications at Sambor, a crucial river port controlling access to the heartland, fall after enemy forces coordinate land and water attacks that overwhelm defensive capabilities. Similar successes at Kreti and Stung Treng open river routes that enable deep penetration into previously secure areas. Intelligence networks that had provided early warning of external threats dissolve as chaos disrupts communication systems that had functioned effectively for generations. Regional officials stop sending regular reports to the capital, either because they have declared independence or because they cannot determine which power should receive sensitive information. Diplomatic contacts with foreign courts become irregular as embassies suspend operations or represent only particular factions rather than unified state interests. The siege of Yasodharapura in 1177 represents the nadir of decline and the ultimate vindication of enemy strategic planning. Prince Jayavarman leads a coordinated assault that combines naval forces advancing up the Mekong system with land armies that had infiltrated through the eastern areas. The capital's defenses, designed to withstand conventional siege warfare, prove inadequate against enemies who can attack simultaneously from multiple directions using both land and water routes. The assault demonstrates sophisticated engineering, as enemy forces employ siege towers, catapults, and undermining techniques that breach the capital's walls after weeks of systematic attack. The city's water defenses, including the great moats that had seemed impregnable, become liabilities when enemy naval forces control the river approaches. Enemy commanders coordinate their assault to coincide with the dry season, when water levels reach their minimum, reducing the effectiveness of hydraulic defensive systems. The sack of the city that had symbolized divine monarchy's triumph becomes a humiliation that reverberates throughout the region and beyond. Shrines are systematically plundered as enemy forces seize treasures accumulated over centuries. The Angkor Wat complex suffers particular damage as enemy soldiers destroy Hindu statuary and inscriptions that had proclaimed royal divine power. Records containing the bureaucratic knowledge necessary for governing the realm disappear in fires that rage through palace complexes and government buildings. The psychological impact of the capital's fall exceeds even its material consequences. For nearly 4 centuries, Yasodharapura had served as visible proof of divine kingship's legitimacy and effectiveness. Foreign visitors had marveled at its magnificence, while subject groups had drawn security from its apparent invincibility. The sight of enemy warriors occupying the royal palace and desecrating sacred monuments shatters beliefs that had sustained loyalty for generations. Royal treasure, accumulated over centuries, disappears as enemy forces systematically loot palace complexes and major shrines. Gold and silver artifacts worth millions in contemporary currency are melted down or shipped back to Champa as proof of victory. The royal regalia that had symbolized divine power for generations becomes war booty displayed in enemy temples, as evidence of cosmic favor shifting to new rulers. Statuary suffers deliberate destruction as enemy forces, motivated by both objectives and differences, attack Hindu monuments that had legitimized enemy power. Libraries containing centuries of accumulated knowledge burn, as invaders show no interest in preserving intellectual achievements that had made the capital a center of learning. Sanskrit manuscripts chronicling legal precedents, astronomical observations, mathematical innovations, and historical records disappear in flames that consume humanity's irreplaceable cultural heritage. The palace school that had trained administrators for service throughout the realm closes as teachers flee and students abandon their studies. Community dispersal accelerates as residents flee the captured capital to seek safety in distant areas or foreign lands. The skilled craftsmen who had made Yasodharapura famous throughout Asia scatter in all directions, taking their expertise to other courts that offer better security. Educated bureaucrats who had managed the realm's complex apparatus become refugees seeking employment in Java, Pagan, or Dai Viet. Wealthy merchants who had financed international exchange relocate their operations to more stable ports. This brain drain weakens recovery prospects even after stability returns, as the human capital that had sustained greatness disperses beyond recovery. The knowledge that had enabled effective governance disappears as experienced officials die in exile or adapt their skills to serve foreign rulers. Craft techniques that had produced architectural and artistic masterpieces vanish as master artisans find no opportunities to train successors in their specialized skills. Regional responses to the capital's fall vary dramatically depending on local conditions, quality of command, and ethnic composition. The western areas under Hmong guidance organize effective movements that harass enemy forces while maintaining hope for eventual liberation. Commander Ananda leads guerrilla operations from mountain strongholds that control crucial supply routes. Buddhist monasteries provide organizational networks for activities, coordinating intelligence sharing and resource distribution among scattered opposition groups. Northern districts dominated by Thai-speaking groups exploit the chaos to assert complete independence from any external control. Local chieftains like Pho Kun Bang Klang Thao organize autonomous structures that will eventually evolve into independent realms. These leaders present themselves as protectors of local communities against both enemy rule and restoration of royal power, appealing to ethnic solidarity and differences that distinguish their communities from the core. Eastern regions, with significant enemy communities, demonstrate mixed reactions to the takeover. Some settlements welcome enemy forces as liberators who share their ethnic heritage and traditions. Others resist foreign control regardless of ethnic connections, preferring familiar local autonomy to distant rule by any external power. The resulting fragmentation creates complex situations where villages separated by only a few kilometers follow completely different policies toward the occupying forces. Enemy rule proves difficult to sustain as forces optimized for rapid riverine operations struggle to administer areas they had conquered primarily for plunder rather than permanent control. Naval capabilities that enable rapid movement along waterways provide inadequate foundation for governing inland groups with different languages, customs, and practices. The expertise necessary for managing complex irrigation systems, tax collection, and legal disputes simply does not exist within enemy ranks. Guerrilla opposition gradually intensifies as local groups organize under leaders who promise to restore legitimate power while adapting their strategies to local conditions. Forest-dwelling communities that had remained largely autonomous under royal rule prove particularly effective at harassing forces. Mountain tribes that control crucial passes and supply routes demand tribute from enemy forces, while secretly supporting opposition movements. River pirates who had operated as semi-independent entrepreneurs during royal times adapt their skills to opposition. Sacred opposition plays a crucial role in maintaining opposition to enemy rule, as Buddhist and Hindu establishments that had legitimized royal power provide organizational networks for underground activities. Monasteries become centers of planning, where monks coordinate intelligence gathering and resource distribution. Hindu shrines serve as meeting places for opposition leaders, who invoke duty to justify opposition to foreign rule. Underground networks develop sophisticated communication systems that enable coordination between distant groups. Commercial disruption under enemy rule creates additional grievances that fuel opposition movements throughout the area. Exchange systems that had generated prosperity for centuries break down as enemy administrators lack the expertise necessary for managing complex networks that had connected Southeast Asia with China, India, and the Islamic world. Agricultural productivity declines as irrigation systems receive inadequate maintenance and farmers abandon fields in contested zones. Currency systems break down completely as enemy forces introduce their own monetary standards, while local groups resort to barter arrangements that complicate commerce. The standardized weights and measures that had facilitated exchange throughout the realm disappear as different regions develop their own systems. Markets that had flourished under royal protection become scenes of violence as competing powers attempt to collect taxes and tolls from the same merchants. Cultural destruction accompanying the takeover generates lasting resentment that transcends immediate concerns. Enemy forces, representing different traditions and cultural values, show little respect for Hindu and Buddhist monuments that embody centuries of artistic achievement and spiritual significance. Library collections assembled over generations disappear, as occupying forces see no value in preserving intellectual heritage that had made the realm a center of learning and innovation. Educational establishments close as teachers flee, and students abandon their studies for opposition or simple survival. The palace school that had trained administrators for service throughout the realm becomes a barracks for forces. Buddhist and Hindu monasteries that had preserved classical learning transform into headquarters. The sophisticated educational system that had produced generations of competent administrators, skilled craftsmen, and learned specialists crumbles under the weight of foreign rule and cultural destruction. The search for legitimate command intensifies as various claimants attempt to rally opposition to enemy rule while competing for popular support. Several princes and regional governors assert royal power while promising to restore divine kingship and drive out foreign invaders. Prince Jayavarman, who will later become Jayavarman VII, emerges as a particularly charismatic leader whose Buddhist beliefs and capabilities attract growing support. His operations from mountain strongholds demonstrate both tactical skill and strategic vision that distinguish him from other claimants. These competing claims create additional confusion as opposition forces must choose between rival leaders who offer different visions of restoration and renewal. Some promise to restore traditional Hindu monarchy exactly as it had existed under previous rulers. Others propose reforms that would address the weaknesses revealed by war and foreign rule. Still others advocate for federal arrangements that would grant greater autonomy to ethnic minorities and regional groups. International implications of the realm's breakdown extend far beyond immediate losses, affecting relationships throughout Asia. The regional balance of power shifts dramatically as neighboring realms recognize opportunities for territorial expansion at minimal cost. Chinese diplomatic records note the disappearance of tribute missions that had provided important sources of exotic goods and diplomatic prestige. The Song dynasty court expresses concern about the breakdown of a major trading partner and the resulting disruption to established commercial networks. Indian Ocean trading networks adjust their routes to avoid areas where commercial security can no longer be guaranteed. Merchants who had relied on royal protection for their operations throughout Southeast Asia seek alternative partnerships with Javanese and Sumatran rulers. The ripple effects extend to distant markets as supplies of precious woods, spices, and luxury goods from the realm become unreliable. The crisis reveals fundamental weaknesses in the divine kingship system that had seemed so successful during periods of strong command. The mandala structure proves vulnerable to succession disputes that can paralyze governance throughout vast areas when competing claimants divide regional loyalties. Prosperity that depends heavily on royal patronage and coordination breaks down when power fragments. Organization based on personal loyalty to individual monarchs cannot maintain coherence when multiple claimants compete for allegiance. Sacred legitimacy that had sustained power for centuries becomes a liability when war undermines popular faith in divine protection. The shrine complexes that had demonstrated royal cosmic power become targets that symbolize competition. The educational establishments that had trained competent administrators disappear when royal patronage vanishes. The cultural achievements that had distinguished civilizations scatter when the social systems that had supported them crumble. Yet even in this darkest hour, seeds of recovery remain embedded in structures and cultural traditions that had sustained the realm through 4 centuries of expansion and achievement. Regional administrators trained in effective governance wait for opportunities to restore competent command. Officers with experience in successful campaigns seek legitimate power they can serve with honor. Sacred establishments preserve both spiritual traditions and practical knowledge that will prove essential for reconstruction efforts. The hydraulic engineering expertise that had created the realm's agricultural foundation survives in the collective memory of communities that depend on water management for survival. Craft techniques that had produced architectural and artistic masterpieces persist among artisans who practice their skills in exile, while hoping for opportunities to return home. The Sanskrit learning that had provided bureaucratic and sacred knowledge continues in monastery schools that maintain educational traditions despite chaos. Most importantly, the ideal of unified power under divine kingship remains powerful among groups who remember the prosperity and security that effective government had provided. The chaos of war and foreign rule demonstrates the costs of fragmentation, while reinforcing appreciation for the benefits that legitimate monarchy could offer. Popular support exists for leaders who can combine capability with competence and sacred power. The stage is set for either complete breakdown or dramatic renewal, as the realm that had achieved unprecedented heights faces the ultimate test of its resilience. Foreign rule has demonstrated the costs of internal division while revealing the persistence of cultural traditions that refuse to accept permanent defeat. From this crucible of humiliation and suffering, a new kind of command must emerge, one capable of learning from past mistakes while building upon enduring strengths that had originally created greatness. The next chapter will determine whether divine kingship can adapt to changed circumstances, or whether the greatest civilization in Southeast Asian history will join the ruins of earlier realms that had once seemed equally invincible. The monsoons continue their eternal cycle, waiting to nourish whatever rises from the ashes of former glory. From the mountain fastnesses of Phnom Kulen, Prince Jayavarman watches smoke rise from his burning homeland. The year 1181 finds him commanding scattered bands of fighters who refuse to accept foreign domination. Unlike previous claimants who had squabbled over ceremonial titles while invaders ravaged the countryside, this 57-year-old veteran possesses both the tactical brilliance and spiritual conviction necessary to forge scattered opposition into unified strength. His faith provides not merely personal comfort, but a revolutionary vision that will transform both warfare and governance. The prince's early campaigns demonstrate strategic thinking that sets him apart from conventional warlords. Rather than attempting spectacular assaults against fortified positions, he systematizes guerrilla activities that gradually strangle occupying supply lines. His fighters strike transport convoys moving along the great rivers, then vanish into forests they know intimately. Captured weapons and provisions strengthen resistance bands while denying resources to occupation troops. Each successful raid attracts new recruits who bring local knowledge essential for expanding activities. Intelligence networks develop under the prince's direction that surpass anything the fragmented resistance had previously achieved. Village headmen provide information about hostile movements and defensive preparations. Merchants traveling established routes carry messages between widely separated groups. Monks, whose freedom of movement occupiers respect, coordinate communications that enable synchronized attacks across vast distances. These networks gradually extend throughout the occupied heartland and into neighboring regions where autonomous warlords calculate the benefits of supporting a legitimate claimant. The prince's convictions influence every aspect of his resistance strategy. Where Hindu traditions had emphasized sovereign divinity and hierarchical submission, his interpretation of Mahayana Buddhism stresses compassionate action that serves all sentient beings. This ideological framework enables him to appeal across ethnic and social boundaries that had previously divided the population. Mon communities in the western districts, Thai-speaking groups in the north, and even some ethnic Cham settlements respond to his message of liberation through righteous struggle. Naval warfare requires particular innovation, as resistance fighters must counter foreign advantages in riverine combat. The prince's commanders develop tactics that employ small, fast boats capable of rapid strikes against larger vessels. These craft, built in hidden shipyards using customary techniques, sacrifice armor for speed and maneuverability. Crews trained in close quarters, fighting board hostile vessels using grappling hooks and rope bridges. Captured boats strengthen the growing fleet while reducing occupier naval capabilities. Strategic patience characterizes the prince's approach as he resists pressure from supporters who demand immediate assault on the occupied capital. His fighters methodically secure rural areas before attempting actions against fortified positions. Each liberated district provides additional resources, recruitment opportunities, and staging areas for future advances. The cumulative effect gradually shifts the balance of power as occupation troops find themselves confined to increasingly isolated strongholds. Diplomatic initiatives complement guerrilla warfare as the prince seeks external support for his restoration campaign. Embassies to the Chinese court present his cause as legitimate resistance against foreign aggression that threatens regional stability. Similar missions to courts in Burma, Java, and Ceylon request material assistance while offering future commercial privileges. These diplomatic efforts yield modest immediate results, but establish international recognition that will prove valuable during subsequent reconstruction. The liberation of Preah Khan in 1182 marks the first major victory in the prince's systematic campaign. This fortified monastery, strategically positioned to control river approaches to the capital, had served as a key hostile stronghold. The assault combines careful planning with innovative tactics that exploit weaknesses in conventional defensive thinking. Diversionary attacks draw defenders to outer perimeters, while elite units infiltrate through drainage channels that occupiers had dismissed as impassable. Hand-to-hand combat within the monastery complex demonstrates the ferocity that spiritual conviction can inspire when channeled toward righteous warfare. Resistance fighters, convinced they serve cosmic justice, display courage that astonishes even veteran Cham soldiers. The victory yields substantial material rewards, weapons, supplies, and treasure that fund expanding activities. More importantly, success against a major hostile position convinces wavering communities that restoration remains possible despite years of defeat and humiliation. Sacred symbolism surrounding Preah Khan's liberation resonates throughout the population. The monastery's restoration as a center of learning and worship demonstrates the prince's commitment to spiritual as well as political renewal. Monks who had fled during the occupation returned to resume their educational and ceremonial functions. Local populations witnessed tangible evidence that their customary institutions can survive foreign domination when defended by leaders who combine capability with genuine devotion. Systematic expansion follows initial success as the prince's fighters methodically reduce hostile positions throughout the eastern regions. Each victory employs lessons learned from previous encounters while adapting to specific tactical challenges. Siege warfare capabilities improve as resistance engineers master techniques for breaching fortifications and disrupting defensive preparations. Coordination between different groups becomes increasingly sophisticated as communication networks mature and command structures develop. The transformation of scattered bands into disciplined armies reflects the prince's organizational genius as much as his strategic vision. Established Khmer organization based on personal loyalty and feudal obligations proves inadequate for sustained guerrilla activities. The prince develops new command structures that combine professional competence with ideological commitment. Officers earn advancement through demonstrated ability rather than hereditary status. Common soldiers serve the cause of liberation rather than individual commanders. Training programs establish standardized procedures for combat activities, intelligence gathering, and logistical support. Veteran fighters who had learned guerrilla tactics through bitter experience train new recruits in essential skills. Weapon maintenance, field medicine, communications protocols, and survival techniques become subjects of systematic instruction. The amateur resistance gradually evolves into professional fighters capable of complex activities against experienced occupiers. Religious principles influence organization in ways that distinguish the prince's armies from conventional troops. Compassionate treatment of prisoners contradicts customary practices that emphasize terror and intimidation. Wounded Khmer soldiers receive medical attention alongside resistance casualties. Captured fighters who demonstrate genuine repentance gain opportunities to join liberation ranks. These policies enhance popular support while undermining hostile morale through example rather than fear. Commercial warfare complements combat activities as resistance groups systematically disrupt trade that supports foreign rule. Transport convoys face constant harassment that makes commerce increasingly unprofitable. Currency manipulation destabilizes financial systems that occupation administrators depend upon for purchasing supplies and paying troops. Agricultural sabotage reduces food production in regions that continue to support hostile control. The cumulative effect gradually strangles the financial foundations that had enabled foreign domination. Intelligence activities become increasingly sophisticated as the prince's networks penetrate hostile administrative structures. Servants in occupation headquarters provide information about strategic planning and troop movements. Corrupt officials sell sensitive documents for gold or ideological conversion. Even some Cham officers, demoralized by years of fruitless campaigning, provide assistance to liberation groups. These intelligence advantages enable resistance commanders to anticipate hostile activities while concealing their own preparations. The siege of Yasodharapura begins in 1183, as the prince finally possesses sufficient strength to attempt recapturing the capital. This campaign requires coordination between land fighters approaching from multiple directions and naval units that must control river approaches. Engineering challenges include breaching fortifications that occupiers have strengthened during their rule. Logistical demands strains supply systems that must support thousands of fighters during extended siege activities. Psychological warfare plays a crucial role as liberation fighters attempt to undermine hostile morale while inspiring popular uprising within the occupied city. Monks circulate among civilian populations, spreading messages that portray the siege as cosmic justice, restoring legitimate order. Propaganda emphasizes the prince's merciful treatment of those who submit voluntarily, while promising severe punishment for those who persist in supporting foreign rule. Night raids and sabotage demonstrate that occupiers cannot maintain security even within their strongest positions. Urban combat within the capital tests both tactical innovation and ideological commitment as resistance fighters navigate through districts they must liberate without destroying. House-to-house fighting requires skills different from the guerrilla activities that had characterized earlier campaigns. Civilian populations, exhausted by years of occupation, provide varying degrees of cooperation. Some neighborhoods welcome liberators enthusiastically, while others remain suspicious of promises that previous claimants had failed to fulfill. The final assault on the palace complex demonstrates the capabilities that the prince's fighters have developed during 2 years of systematic campaigning. Coordinated attacks from multiple directions overwhelmed defensive positions that had seemed impregnable. Engineering units breach walls, using techniques adapted from siege warfare manuals preserved in monastery libraries. Elite fighters penetrate inner courtyards, where desperate Cham defenders make final stands around symbolic centers of their occupation. Victory celebrations following the capital's liberation combine ceremonial elements with innovations that reflect the prince's spiritual convictions. Regalia recovered from hostile looters undergoes purification ceremonies before being invested with renewed sacred significance. Monks perform blessings that sanctify the restoration, while Hindu priests conduct rituals that maintain continuity with ancestral traditions. The synthesis demonstrates the king's intention to unite diverse communities under a common vision of compassionate governance. International recognition follows domestic victory as foreign courts acknowledge the new monarch's legitimate authority. Chinese diplomatic records note the restoration of tribute missions that had lapsed during the years of chaos. Exchange relationships resume with Indian Ocean networks that had suspended activities during the occupation. These external validations strengthen internal legitimacy while providing access to resources necessary for reconstruction efforts. Spiritual transformation becomes apparent as the king begins implementing his vision of enlightened monarchy that differs fundamentally from previous Hindu models. Where earlier rulers had emphasized sovereign divinity and cosmic hierarchy, his interpretation of Buddhism stresses the monarch's obligation to serve all subjects with equal compassion. This ideological shift influences every aspect of governance from legal procedures to architectural projects. The king presents himself not as a god demanding worship, but as a bodhisattva dedicated to alleviating universal suffering. Administrative reforms reflect sacred principles while addressing practical problems revealed during the recent crisis. The mandala system that had proved vulnerable to succession disputes undergoes modification that strengthens central coordination without eliminating regional autonomy. Provincial governors receive enhanced authority over local affairs, but operate within frameworks that ensure accountability to policies. New bureaucratic procedures emphasize competence and ethical behavior rather than hereditary privilege or personal connections. Legal innovations introduce concepts of mercy and redemption that balance concerns for justice and social order. Criminal punishments consider circumstances and motivations, rather than merely focusing on actions and consequences. Rehabilitation becomes a legitimate objective alongside deterrence and retribution. These reforms reflect teachings about the possibility of spiritual transformation, while maintaining practical requirements for maintaining peace and security. Financial policies demonstrate systematic attention to popular welfare that distinguishes the king's reign from previous periods focused primarily on elite interests. State-sponsored irrigation projects improve agricultural productivity in regions that had suffered during recent conflicts. Public works programs provide employment opportunities for populations displaced by warfare. Commerce regulations protect local craftsmen and merchants from exploitation by foreign interests. The cumulative effect creates broader prosperity that strengthens popular support for the restored monarchy. Building projects commence immediately as the king seeks to demonstrate the renewed nation's vitality through architectural achievements that surpass previous accomplishments. His programs differ from earlier efforts in both scale and symbolic content. Where Hindu monarchs had emphasized glorification through temple mountains that proclaim divine status, these projects focus on public benefit through hospitals, schools, rest houses, and infrastructure improvements that serve practical as well as spiritual purposes. The Bayon Temple emerges as the supreme expression of the king's vision, transformed into stone architecture. This massive structure, positioned at the geometric center of Angkor Thom, combines temple mountain symbolism with innovative features that reflect cosmology. The famous face towers, each bearing the serene expression of the compassionate bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, create visual metaphors for the monarch's spiritual aspirations and governmental philosophy. Every architectural element serves both aesthetic and didactic purposes. Angkor Thom itself represents urban planning on an unprecedented scale that demonstrates the organizational capabilities the king had developed during his resistance campaigns. The new capital, enclosed within walls that stretch 12 kilometers around, accommodates populations that may exceed 1 million inhabitants. Broad causeways connect major temples and administrative complexes through geometric layouts that reflect concepts of cosmic order. Water management systems supply the city's needs while creating aesthetic features that enhance the urban environment. Hospital building throughout the realm reveals the practical application of compassion through systematic public health measures. These institutions, numbering over 100 according to inscriptional records, provide medical care regardless of patients' social status or ability to pay. Staff training emphasizes both healing techniques and medical knowledge derived from Indian sources. Pharmaceutical gardens supply herbs and medicinal compounds according to prescriptions preserved in Sanskrit medical texts. The hospital network represents social welfare programs that surpass contemporary achievements anywhere. Educational expansion accompanies medical improvements as monastery schools proliferate throughout the restored realm. These institutions teach literacy in Sanskrit, Khmer, and often additional languages relevant to local conditions. Advanced instruction covers subjects ranging from philosophy to practical skills like mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Scholarship programs enable talented students from humble backgrounds to pursue higher learning previously reserved for aristocratic elites. The expanded educational system produces human resources necessary for effective governance and continued cultural development. Road networks facilitate both commercial activity and administrative communication as the king's engineers construct transportation infrastructure that connects distant regions with the capital. These highways, marked by rest houses positioned at regular intervals, enable rapid movement of people, goods, and information across territories spanning hundreds of thousands of square miles. Bridge work employs innovative engineering techniques that overcome challenging geographical obstacles. The transportation system strengthens political unity while promoting integration. Armed organization adapts to peacetime requirements while maintaining capabilities necessary for defending the restored realm against external threats. Professional units stationed at strategic locations provide rapid response capabilities for border security and internal emergencies. Training programs develop specialized skills for different environments. Riverine warfare, mountain combat, siege activities, and cavalry tactics. Intelligence networks established during the resistance campaigns continue monitoring potential threats from neighboring powers and internal dissidents. Cultural synthesis accelerates as the king's orientation influences artistic development while maintaining continuity with Khmer aesthetic achievements. Sculpture evolves toward more humanistic representations that emphasize compassion and wisdom rather than power and majesty. Architectural decoration incorporates narrative themes alongside classical Hindu motifs. Literary production flourishes as court poets compose works celebrating the monarch's achievements while exploring philosophical themes derived from teachings. Diplomatic relationships expand as the restored realm's stability and prosperity attract international attention. Embassy exchanges with courts throughout Asia demonstrate renewed regional influence while facilitating commercial and cultural contacts. Marriage alliances create networks that extend influence without requiring expensive campaigns. These relationships provide security against external threats while opening opportunities for exchange that benefit all participants. Tolerance characterizes the king's policies toward diverse communities within his domains. Hindu traditions continue receiving support, even as Buddhism gains prominence in court circles. Local spiritual practices that had maintained community identity during the recent chaos undergo integration with state-sponsored activities. This inclusive approach strengthens popular loyalty while preventing the sectarian conflicts that had weakened previous dynasties during succession crises. Succession planning receives systematic attention as the king seeks to prevent the chaos that had followed Jayavarman II's death. Legal frameworks establish clear procedures for inheritance, while providing mechanisms for addressing disputed claims through institutional rather than violent means. Potential heirs receive training in both governance and warfare that prepares them for responsibilities. Advisory councils gain enhanced authority to ensure continuity of policies during transitional periods. Territorial expansion resumes as the realm's restored strength enables recovery of regions lost during the recent crisis. Campaigns against remaining Cham strongholds employ combined arms tactics that demonstrate lessons learned during the resistance struggle. Naval activities secure control over crucial river systems that provide transportation routes and defensive barriers. Diplomatic initiatives complement pressure by encouraging defections among hostile allies who recognize changing strategic realities. The conquest of Champa in 1203 represents the culmination of the king's campaigns and the complete reversal of the humiliations suffered during the previous decades. This achievement requires coordinating land and sea activities across difficult terrain while maintaining supply lines over vast distances. Victory yields substantial material rewards that fund additional projects while eliminating the primary external threat to regional security. The campaign's success establishes the realm as the dominant power throughout mainland Southeast Asia. Integration of conquered territories demonstrates the king's commitment to compassionate governance, rather than mere exploitation. Former enemies who submit peacefully receive opportunities to maintain local authority under oversight. Policies encourage development rather than systematic plunder. Cultural institutions in occupied regions continue operating under new management that respects local traditions while ensuring loyalty to the crown. These policies reduce resistance while maximizing the long-term benefits of territorial expansion. International recognition of the realm's achievements attracts scholars, merchants, and pilgrims from across Asia who seek to study or participate in its cultural flowering. Chinese visitors record detailed descriptions of Angkor's magnificence that circulate widely among educated elites. Indian monks establish permanent residence to study philosophical developments under patronage. Islamic traders from Southeast Asian ports contribute to commercial networks that span the Indian Ocean. This international attention enhances prestige while facilitating beneficial exchanges. Environmental challenges receive systematic attention as the king's engineers work to restore and expand the hydraulic systems that support agricultural productivity. Climate variations that had complicated earlier reconstruction efforts undergo accommodation through flexible water management strategies. New reservoir work employs improved techniques that reduce maintenance requirements while increasing storage capacity. Canal networks extend cultivation into previously marginal lands that can support larger populations and generate additional tax revenues. By 1210, the realm has achieved territorial extent and cultural sophistication that surpass all previous accomplishments. The king's dominions stretch from the South China Sea to the Bay of Bengal, encompassing territories that include much of present-day Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and southern Vietnam. The capital at Angkor Thom stands as one of the world's greatest cities, whose architectural achievements rival anything built elsewhere during the medieval period. Prosperity supports populations that exceed 1 million inhabitants, while funding continued expansion of infrastructure and cultural institutions. Social mobility increases as principles and practical administrative requirements create opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than hereditary status. Service, educational achievement, devotion, and commercial success provide pathways for talented individuals to improve their circumstances. Women participate more actively in activities and institutions than previous practices had permitted. These changes strengthen social cohesion while maximizing human resources available for continued development. As the king's reign approaches its end, the transformation of the realm reflects both his personal vision and the collective efforts of populations who had suffered through chaos and foreign occupation. The enlightened monarchy he established differs fundamentally from earlier Hindu models, while maintaining effective governance over vast territories and diverse populations. His architectural achievements, administrative innovations, and successes create foundations that will influence Southeast Asian civilization for centuries to come. Yet even unprecedented success cannot eliminate all challenges facing the restored realm. Climate variations continue threatening agricultural productivity that supports the complex society the king has created. Neighboring powers adapt to the realm's dominance while seeking opportunities to recover territories or influence. Internal tensions between established and innovative approaches to governance require constant attention from administrators. The succession question remains problematic despite systematic planning efforts. The warrior king, who had emerged from mountain hideouts to restore his people's independence, prepares to transfer authority to successors who must maintain achievements won through decades of struggle. His legacy encompasses not merely territorial conquest or architectural monuments, but fundamental changes in how rulers relate to their subjects and how governments serve popular welfare. The compassionate monarchy he established will face tests that will determine whether revolutionary ideals can survive the practical challenges of governing complex societies over extended periods. As the monsoons return each year to flood the rice paddies that support millions of inhabitants, the king's realm stands as proof that human dedication can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles when guided by spiritual conviction and strategic wisdom. The temples rise toward the heavens, while the hospitals serve earthly needs. The roads connect distant communities, while the schools prepare future generations for continued achievements. The dream of enlightened governance has become reality through the vision of one extraordinary individual who transformed both his own life and the fate of an entire civilization. The death of the great monarch in 1218 leaves behind an architectural wonder and a governance structure that his successors struggle to maintain. Jayavarman II inherits not merely territories spanning from the South China Sea to the Bay of Bengal, but the enormous financial burden of maintaining the most ambitious infrastructure in human history. The hospital network requires constant funding for medicines and staff salaries. The vast temple complexes demand ongoing repairs to prevent tropical decay. The road system needs perpetual maintenance to remain passable during monsoon seasons. Most critically, the hydraulic apparatus that supports over 1 million inhabitants requires engineering expertise and labor resources that strain even the state's considerable capabilities. The new sovereign faces immediate challenges that reveal fundamental weaknesses in the centralized structure his predecessor had created. Provincial governors, who had operated efficiently under the previous monarch's charismatic leadership, begin asserting greater autonomy over regional affairs. The Buddhist administrative philosophy that emphasized compassion and consensus building proves less effective when central authority lacks the personal prestige that had sustained earlier policies. Regional ethnic groups, temporarily unified under the previous reign's inclusive vision, gradually resume their assertions of distinct identity and territorial autonomy. Succession disputes emerge almost immediately as various princes and powerful nobles contest Jayavarman II's legitimacy. The institutional frameworks designed to prevent such conflicts prove inadequate when faced with determined opposition from claimants who possess substantial territorial bases and armed followings. The Mon inhabitants in the western regions rally behind Prince Anupama, who promises greater autonomy for their districts. Northern territories with significant Thai-speaking residents support Prince Jayavarman VIII, whose mother's lineage connects him to emerging Thai political movements beyond the state's borders. Religious fragmentation accelerates as the unified spiritual vision that had characterized the previous era splinters along sectarian lines. Hindu priests, who had accommodated themselves to the prominence of Buddhism during the great king's lifetime, begin reasserting the superiority of traditional practices and beliefs. Some Buddhist monasteries embrace Theravada traditions that emphasize individual salvation over the Mahayana ideals of universal compassion that had inspired earlier policies. These divisions create ideological justifications for political opposition, while undermining the spiritual unity that had sustained centralized authority. Administrative corruption increases dramatically as provincial officials recognize that weakened central oversight creates opportunities for personal enrichment. Tax collectors retain larger portions of revenues for themselves while submitting reduced remittances to the capital. Military commanders sell equipment and supplies to fund private armies that serve personal rather than state interests. Construction supervisors divert materials from public projects to private buildings that enhance their own status and wealth. The ethical standards that had distinguished earlier administration gradually erode under pressure from competing loyalties and reduced accountability. Economic pressures mount as the cost of maintaining inherited infrastructure exceeds the state's capacity to generate adequate revenues. The hospital network, which had operated successfully when royal patronage supplemented tax funding, begins closing facilities as financial support dwindles. Road maintenance decreases as regional governors redirect resources to immediate political needs rather than long-term infrastructure preservation. The great reservoirs and canal networks suffer from deferred maintenance that allows silting and structural deterioration to accumulate over time. International trade relationships deteriorate as internal political instability creates uncertainty for foreign merchants who had established profitable commercial partnerships during the previous era. Chinese traders reduce their operations rather than risk losses from civil conflicts or policy changes. Islamic merchants from Southeast Asian ports redirect their activities toward more stable partners in Java and Sumatra. The reduction in commercial revenues further strains finances, while weakening the economic foundations that had supported cultural and architectural achievements. Agricultural productivity begins declining as the sophisticated water management apparatus requires constant attention that competing political factions cannot coordinate effectively. The Western Barre, that magnificent 8-kilometer reservoir, accumulates sediment that reduces storage capacity, while embankment erosion threatens structural integrity. Canal networks throughout the Central Plains suffer from inadequate cleaning and repair, reducing water flow to agricultural areas that depend on controlled irrigation. Rice yields decrease in regions where farmers cannot rely on predictable water supplies, creating food shortages that force migrations and reduce tax revenues. Climate variations compound human failures, as unusual weather patterns strain agricultural arrangements already weakened by political neglect. Extended droughts during the 1250s expose the vulnerabilities of intensive agriculture that depends on elaborate hydraulic infrastructure. When monsoon rains fail to arrive on schedule, reservoir levels drop below critical thresholds, while canal networks carry insufficient water to maintain crop production. Conversely, exceptionally heavy rainfall during some seasons overwhelms drainage that lacks adequate maintenance, causing flooding that destroys crops and damages infrastructure. Temple construction virtually ceases as royal resources flow toward immediate political and military necessities, rather than long-term cultural projects. The workshops that had employed thousands of skilled craftsmen, producing architectural sculptures and decorative elements close as patronage disappears. Master stone carvers, bronze workers, and other artisans seek employment elsewhere or abandon their specialized trades for more immediately profitable occupations. The artistic traditions that had distinguished the state's cultural achievements begin fragmenting as knowledge transmission breaks down. Military organization suffers as professional units fragment into personal armies, serving individual commanders rather than unified state interests. Equipment quality deteriorates as production centers fall under regional control and standardization disappears. Training programs that had maintained tactical proficiency across diverse operational environments break down when competing factions refuse to share military knowledge. The elephant corps, that prestigious symbol of royal power, disperses among various claimants who use these magnificent animals to enhance their own status, rather than serve collective defense needs. Foreign pressure intensifies as neighboring powers recognize opportunities to exploit internal weaknesses. The emerging Sukhothai state, established by Thai-speaking groups who had previously acknowledged Khmer suzerainty, begins asserting control over territories in the northern regions. King Ram Khamhaeng of Sukhothai combines military pressure with diplomatic initiatives that appeal to ethnic solidarity among Thai settlements within the fragmenting nation. His success demonstrates how autonomy movements can evolve into complete independence when central authority proves unable to maintain effective control. The Mongol threat creates additional complications as Yuan dynasty forces under Kublai Khan extend their influence throughout Southeast Asia. While direct Mongol invasion never materializes, the mere possibility forces the state's fractured leadership to divert resources toward defensive preparations that further strain already inadequate finances. Intelligence reports about Mongol military capabilities and expansion strategies create panic among rulers who recognize their vulnerability to external conquest during periods of internal division. Ayutthaya's emergence as a major regional power represents the most serious long-term threat to territorial integrity. Founded around 1350 by Prince Yu Thong, who later becomes King Ramathibodi I, this new Thai state combines effective military organization with sophisticated diplomatic strategies that gradually isolate the fragmenting nation. Ayutthaya's rulers present themselves as legitimate heirs to earlier Thai kingdoms, while offering protection to ethnic Thai residents throughout the region. Their success in unifying diverse Thai-speaking groups creates a powerful alternative to continued subordination to weakened central authority. Naval warfare becomes increasingly problematic as the state's river fleets prove inadequate against enemies who have developed superior maritime capabilities. Thai forces operating from Ayutthaya employ lighter, more maneuverable vessels that outperform the heavy transport barges that had served adequately during earlier periods of regional dominance. Control over crucial waterways slips away as naval commanders either defect to emerging Thai states or operate as independent pirates who serve their own interests rather than any larger political authority. Urban decline accelerates at Angkor Thom as the capital's enormous population becomes unsustainable without effective coordination. The sophisticated water supply arrangements that had supported over 1 million inhabitants require constant maintenance that political chaos makes impossible. Public health deteriorates as hospital services decline and sanitation breaks down. Crime increases as unemployed craftsmen and displaced farmers resort to banditry for survival. Wealthy families begin relocating to smaller, more defensible settlements where regional authorities can provide adequate security. Intellectual decline accompanies physical decay as the educational institutions that had preserved and transmitted knowledge lose royal patronage and popular support. The palace school that had trained administrators for service throughout the nation closes as career prospects in service disappear. Monastery schools reduce their educational programs to focus on immediate spiritual needs rather than broader intellectual development. Libraries accumulated over centuries suffer from neglect, as scribes find more immediately profitable occupations than copying and preserving manuscripts. Religious architecture suffers systematic deterioration, as temple complexes lack resources for ongoing maintenance against tropical climate pressures. The Bayon Temple, that supreme achievement of the previous era, develops structural problems, as foundation settling creates cracks that allow water infiltration during monsoon seasons. Stone carvings erode under constant exposure to humidity and temperature variations that cause expansion and contraction cycles. Vegetation growth within temple complexes accelerates as groundskeeping staff abandon their positions for other employment. Demographic changes reflect broader social and economic disruptions as people migrate away from areas where collapse has created dangerous conditions. The Central Plains, which had supported the highest population densities in the medieval world, experienced significant depopulation as farmers seek more secure livelihoods elsewhere. Some families relocate to regions where provincial authorities maintain better order, while others emigrate entirely to neighboring countries that offer superior opportunities for economic advancement and personal security. Cultural fragmentation accelerates as regional groups revive traditions that had been subordinated to imperial cultural standards during the height of centralized power. Mon inhabitants in the Western territories resume using their traditional languages and customs, rather than the Sanskrit and Khmer practices that had been promoted by earlier administrations. Thai-speaking residents develop closer cultural connections with emerging independent Thai states than with the traditional imperial center. Even ethnic Khmer settlements begin asserting variations that distinguish their practices from court-sponsored cultural norms. Commercial networks that had connected the nation with markets throughout Asia gradually collapse as internal instability makes long-distance trade increasingly unprofitable and dangerous. The standardized currency arrangements that had facilitated complex commercial transactions break down as different regions issue their own coins or return to barter. Weights and measures lose uniformity as districts develop their own standards. The great markets at Angkor Thom close as merchant families relocate to more stable commercial centers. Technological knowledge begins disappearing as the artisan guilds that had preserved specialized skills scatter in search of employment opportunities. The hydraulic engineering expertise that had created the nation's agricultural foundation survives only in isolated areas where conditions permit continued practice. Architectural knowledge fragments as master builders find no opportunities to train apprentices in the complex techniques required for monumental construction. Bronze casting, stone carving, and other craft specializations decline as workshop arrangements collapse. Administrative knowledge suffers similar decay as the educated bureaucratic class that had managed complex functions disperses to seek opportunities elsewhere. The legal precedents and procedural knowledge that had enabled effective governance over vast territories and diverse groups disappear as experienced officials die without training successors. Record-keeping breaks down as provincial archives are abandoned or destroyed during conflicts. The institutional memory that had sustained effective administration for centuries vanishes within a few generations. Jayavarman VIII's long reign from 1243 to 1295 represents a partial restoration of central authority, but his policies accelerate religious and cultural fragmentation. His conversion to Hinduism and systematic persecution of Buddhist institutions destroys much of the spiritual infrastructure that had distinguished the previous era. Thousands of Buddhist statues suffer deliberate defacement as the king attempts to eliminate visible reminders of the previous dynasty's religious orientation. Monasteries lose their landholdings and educational functions as royal patronage shifts toward Hindu temples and Brahmin priests. The persecution creates lasting divisions that undermine social cohesion and legitimacy. Buddhist groups that had supported previous administrations become alienated from royal authority, while Hindu residents remain suspicious of a monarchy that had previously favored their religious rivals. These sectarian tensions create additional obstacles to effective governance, while providing ideological justifications for regional autonomy movements that challenge central control. Military reforms under Jayavarman VIII achieve limited success in restoring defensive capabilities, but cannot address fundamental economic and environmental problems that continue weakening the nation's foundations. Professional military units receive improved equipment and training, but recruitment becomes increasingly difficult as agricultural decline reduces the population base from which soldiers can be drawn. The cost of maintaining adequate armed forces strains budgets that already face overwhelming infrastructure maintenance requirements. Territorial losses accelerate during the late 13th and early 14th centuries as emerging Thai states systematically absorb regions where central authority has become ineffective. Sukhothai's expansion under King Ram Khamhaeng encompasses vast areas that had previously acknowledged Khmer suzerainty. The loss of these territories reduces tax revenues while eliminating recruitment areas for military service. Each territorial loss weakens the state's capacity to defend remaining regions, creating a spiral of decline that proves increasingly difficult to reverse. Administrative decentralization becomes inevitable as the central authority lacks resources to maintain effective control over distant provinces. Regional governors receive enhanced autonomy over taxation, military recruitment, and legal administration as the royal administration acknowledges its inability to manage detailed oversight of regional affairs. While this pragmatic accommodation enables some regions to maintain basic functions, it also reduces central coordination and facilitates the gradual evolution of de facto independence movements. environmental degradation continues accelerating as hydraulic infrastructure receives inadequate maintenance and agricultural practices adapt to reduced oversight. Farmers in regions where irrigation has failed resort to less intensive cultivation techniques that support smaller groups but require less coordination and maintenance. Forest clearance for agriculture increases as settlements attempt to compensate for declining yields from established agricultural areas. These practices create soil erosion and watershed damage that further reduces agricultural productivity. Archaeological evidence suggests that climate change during this period compounds human failures by creating environmental conditions that challenge even well-maintained agricultural arrangements. Extended droughts become more frequent and severe, while irregular monsoon patterns disrupt the seasonal rhythms that had governed agricultural planning for centuries. Rising sea levels affect coastal areas and river delta regions, while changing precipitation patterns alter the hydrology of river networks that provide water for irrigation and transportation. Economic adaptation becomes necessary as the complex monetized economy that had characterized earlier periods gives way to simpler arrangements based on production and barter exchange. Districts that had specialized in particular crafts or agricultural products for distant markets return to more diversified production that reduces dependency on trade networks. While this adaptation enhances self-sufficiency, it also reduces the economic integration that had sustained complex structures and cultural institutions. Social mobility decreases dramatically as the educational and administrative opportunities that had enabled talented individuals to advance regardless of birth circumstances largely disappear. Hereditary social distinctions become more rigid as merit-based advancement becomes less feasible. The egalitarian ideals that had characterized Buddhist administrative philosophy give way to more traditional hierarchical arrangements that emphasize birth status over individual capability or achievement. Women's roles contract as the economic opportunities and religious institutions that had supported female participation in public life decline or disappear. The commercial activities that had enabled some women to achieve economic independence become less viable as trade networks collapse. Educational opportunities that had been available to women during the previous era largely vanish as monastery schools close or reduce their programs. Political influence that some women had exercised through palace administrative positions disappears as structures simplify. Cultural production continues at reduced levels as districts maintain traditional practices despite the loss of royal patronage and institutional support. Folk traditions that had been subordinated to court-sponsored cultural activities experience revival as groups seek to preserve their identity during periods of political uncertainty. Oral literature traditions become more important as written culture declines with the collapse of educational institutions and scribal guilds. Religious syncretism accelerates as districts blend elements from different traditions in response to changing circumstances and reduced institutional authority. Hindu and Buddhist practices combine with indigenous animistic traditions to create distinctive regional religious cultures. These syncretic developments reflect both creative adaptation to changing conditions and the breakdown of orthodox religious authority that had maintained clearer distinctions between different spiritual traditions. By 1350, the nation that had once commanded respect throughout Asia has fragmented into a collection of competing principalities and autonomous regions. The great capital at Angkor Thom houses only a fraction of its former population, while many of its magnificent temples stand empty except for the occasional royal ceremony. The hydraulic infrastructure that had supported millions of inhabitants operates at reduced capacity, supporting agricultural production adequate only for much smaller groups. The administrative apparatus that had governed territories from the South China Sea to the Bay of Bengal now exercises effective authority only over the immediate vicinity of the capital. Yet even in this reduced state, the cultural and architectural legacy of earlier achievements continues influencing regional development. The engineering knowledge that had created the great reservoirs and canal networks survives in areas that maintain smaller-scale water management projects. Artistic traditions persist in simplified forms that adapt monumental techniques to regional needs and resources. Religious and philosophical ideas that had flourished during the Golden Age continue developing within groups that preserve intellectual traditions despite political disruption. The stage is set for either complete collapse or dramatic adaptation, as the nation faces challenges that will determine whether any vestige of the great civilization can survive the perfect storm of environmental stress, political fragmentation, and foreign pressure. The monsoons continue their eternal cycle, but the human arrangements that had once channeled their power to support unprecedented prosperity now struggle merely to maintain basic subsistence for much reduced inhabitants. The greatest experiment in Southeast Asian civilization approaches its most critical test. The 14th century closes with the ancient capital a shadow of its former magnificence. King Jayavarman IX rules over territories that barely extend beyond the great city's immediate vicinity, while the vast temple complexes echo with emptiness, where once 1,000,000 voices had created the bustle of the world's largest urban center. The hydraulic marvels that had sustained this colossus now operate at minimal capacity, supporting perhaps 1/10 of the population that had flourished during the Golden Age. Yet within this diminished state, the seeds of both final catastrophe and enduring legacy continue to germinate. Ayutthaya's emergence under King Ramathibodi represents more than mere territorial expansion. It embodies a fundamental shift in Southeast Asian power that relegates the ancient capital to provincial status. The new Thai kingdom combines administrative efficiency, learned from imperial precedents, with military innovations adapted to change strategic realities. Their armies employ firearms acquired through trade with Chinese and Islamic merchants, weapons that render traditional siege defenses obsolete. More critically, Ayutthaya's rulers master the art of riverine warfare that enables rapid strikes deep into territories that had once seemed protected by distance and natural barriers. The contrast between the two capitals reveals the extent of transformation that has reshaped the region. Ayutthaya rises on an island surrounded by 3 rivers, its strategic position enabling control over river traffic, while providing defensive advantages that complement active military capabilities instead of replacing them. The city's buildings reflect practical considerations over symbolic grandeur, with royal palaces designed for administrative efficiency instead of cosmic representation. Markets bustle with traders from across Asia who recognize Ayutthaya as the region's emerging commercial center, while the great capital's bazaars stand largely empty. Diplomatic isolation compounds military vulnerability as neighboring powers increasingly treat the ancient realm as an anachronism whose time has passed. Chinese court records from the Ming dynasty note the irregular arrival of tribute missions from the old empire, contrasting sharply with the reliable embassies that Ayutthaya maintains. Islamic traders who had once competed for access to imperial markets now barely acknowledge the reduced state's existence. Even the Mon and Cham populations, who had maintained connections with the empire, begin orienting themselves toward emerging centers of power. Internal rebellion accelerates territorial fragmentation as provincial governors recognize that nominal allegiance to the ancient capital provides fewer benefits than accommodation with ascending Thai power. The western regions formally transfer their allegiance to Ayutthaya around 1380, bringing with them the agricultural surpluses and tax revenues that had sustained the remnant state. Northern territories simply cease acknowledging any external authority, their local chieftains establishing de facto independence while maintaining ceremonial respect for ancient traditions. Military capabilities decline precipitously as the recruitment base shrinks and financial resources prove inadequate for maintaining even modest armed forces. The elephant corps, once numbering in the thousands, dwindles to fewer than 50 animals, maintained more for ceremonial purposes than battlefield utility. Professional soldiers desert to seek employment with Ayutthaya or other emerging powers that offer regular pay and advancement opportunities. The Royal Guard itself becomes unreliable, as soldiers recognize that loyalty to a dying state provides poor career prospects. Economic desperation drives increasingly destructive resource extraction policies, as successive rulers attempt to generate revenues adequate for basic governmental functions. Temple treasures, accumulated over centuries, face systematic liquidation to fund military requirements and administrative expenses. The great bronze statues that had adorned religious complexes disappear into smelting furnaces, their metal converted into weapons or sold to foreign traders. Even building elements face removal when their materials prove valuable enough to finance immediate necessities. Artistic production virtually ceases as the social structures that had supported creative excellence dissolve under financial pressure. The royal workshops that had employed thousands of skilled craftsmen close permanently, their master artisans either emigrating to courts that appreciate their skills or abandoning their trades for more immediately profitable occupations. The palace school that had educated generations of administrators and scholars becomes a shadow institution, maintaining only the most basic educational functions. Literary composition declines to occasional court panegyrics that celebrate past glories instead of contemporary accomplishments. Religious decline affects both Buddhist and Hindu institutions as royal patronage disappears and popular support diminishes. The great monasteries that had served as centers of learning and spiritual guidance reduce their activities to essential ceremonial functions. Temple maintenance becomes impossible, as structural repairs require resources that neither the state nor private donors can provide. Gradually, the tropical climate begins reclaiming works that had seemed destined for eternity, vegetation sprouting from cracks in stone walls, while monsoon rains erode sculptures that had proclaimed divine authority for centuries. The siege mentality that develops within the shrinking state creates social tensions that further undermine stability and effectiveness. Court officials become increasingly isolated from conditions in the remaining territories as communication networks break down and security concerns limit travel. Administrative decisions reflect palace politics instead of accurate assessments of external realities. The bureaucratic apparatus that had once efficiently managed vast territories and diverse populations proves incapable of adapting to the changed circumstances that require flexibility over formal procedure. Popular disillusionment grows as the benefits of royal protection diminish, while tax burdens increase to support an increasingly ineffective administration. Farmers in regions still nominally under the capital's control begin withholding tribute or transferring their allegiance to local strongmen who provide better security. Urban craftsmen and merchants relocate to commercial centers where their skills command higher compensation and greater opportunities for advancement. The social contract that had bound diverse populations to the ancient dynasty gradually dissolves under the pressure of mutual disappointment and competing alternatives. Thai military pressure intensifies throughout the late 14th and early 15th centuries as Ayuthya's rulers recognize opportunities to eliminate their primary regional rival permanently. King Boromiracha I launches systematic campaigns that capture key fortifications along the approaches to the ancient capital, while avoiding the enormous costs that formal siege warfare would require. These operations demonstrate strategic patience combined with tactical innovation, gradually strangling the great city's connections to remaining territories instead of attempting immediate conquest through direct assault. The campaigns reveal fundamental changes in military technology and tactics that render traditional defensive strategies obsolete. Thai forces employ early firearms that can breach stone fortifications previously considered impregnable. Their naval capabilities enable rapid movement of troops and supplies along river networks that provide strategic highways into the heartland. Most importantly, their intelligence networks provide detailed information about defensive preparations and internal political conditions that enable precise targeting of vulnerable positions. Diplomatic efforts to secure external assistance prove futile, as potential allies calculate the costs and benefits of supporting a declining power against an ascending regional hegemon. Chinese imperial officials, preoccupied with northern threats and internal administrative challenges, show little interest in intervening in Southeast Asian conflicts that appear to be resolving themselves through natural political evolution. Islamic traders and rulers who might theoretically provide support recognize that commercial opportunities lie with Ayutthaya instead of the ancient empire. Even traditional connections prove insufficient to generate meaningful assistance when practical considerations favor accommodation with emerging power. The psychological impact of prolonged pressure gradually undermines resistance among defenders who recognize that their struggle serves symbolic purposes instead of strategic ones. Military commanders begin questioning orders that require defending positions whose loss would not significantly affect the kingdom's ultimate survival prospects. Court officials debate whether continued resistance serves the population's interests or merely postpones inevitable accommodation with regional realities. Religious leaders contemplate whether divine favor has permanently shifted away from a dynasty that appears incapable of protecting its subjects or preserving its spiritual legacy. The final siege begins in 1430 as King Boromiracha II decides that complete elimination of rival authority serves Ayutthaya's long-term interests better than continued coexistence with a weakened but potentially troublesome neighbor. The assault employs overwhelming force against defenders whose numbers and capabilities have declined below the threshold necessary for effective resistance. Artillery bombardment reduces key fortifications, while coordinated infantry attacks overwhelm defensive positions that lack adequate manpower or equipment. The siege's conduct reveals both military professionalism and sensitivity as Thai commanders seek to minimize destruction of temple treasures while ensuring complete political victory. Orders emphasize capturing instead of destroying religious complexes whose artistic excellence commands respect even from conquerors. Civilian populations receive guarantees of safety contingent upon non-resistance, while royal family members face exile instead of execution. These policies reflect recognition that legitimacy requires demonstrating superior virtue as well as military capability. Urban combat proceeds with surprising rapidity as defenders abandon positions that cannot be held against overwhelming odds. The royal palace complex surrenders after token resistance, its occupants recognizing that continued fighting would achieve nothing beyond unnecessary bloodshed. Temple treasures and administrative records face systematic examination as Thai officials seek to understand and potentially appropriate the governmental techniques that had sustained imperial power for 6 centuries. King Ponhiayat the last effective ruler of the ancient dynasty, accepts exile instead of death, as his capital falls to forces that represent not merely military conquest, but historical transformation. His departure marks the end of over 6 centuries of continuous royal residence at the site that had become synonymous with Southeast Asian civilization. The royal regalia, those sacred objects that had symbolized divine authority since Jayavarman II's Devaraja ceremony in 802, accompanies the royal family into exile as tangible reminders of departed glory. The establishment of a new capital at Phnom Penh reflects both practical necessities and symbolic accommodation with changed regional realities. The Mekong River location provides better access to commercial networks while positioning the reduced kingdom closer to the sea routes that increasingly dominate Southeast Asian trade. The site's selection acknowledges that territorial control over the ancient heartland has become impossible, while suggesting that imperial identity can survive geographic displacement. The evacuation proceeds gradually as remaining inhabitants recognize that the city's economic foundations have disappeared permanently. Craftsmen and traders migrate toward commercial centers, where their skills command adequate compensation. Administrative families seek employment opportunities in courts that appreciate their educational backgrounds and governmental experience. Even religious communities begin relocating as temple maintenance becomes impossible and patronage diminishes beyond sustainability thresholds. Preservation becomes a concern primarily for Buddhist monks who recognize their religious obligation to maintain sacred sites regardless of political circumstances. Scattered monastic communities establish minimal presence at major temple complexes, conducting essential ceremonies while allowing secondary structures to succumb to tropical decay. Their efforts preserve core religious functions, while acknowledging that comprehensive maintenance exceeds available resources. These dedicated individuals become the bridge between ancient excellence and eventual rediscovery. The jungle reclamation begins almost immediately as human maintenance ceases and natural forces resume their eternal cycle of growth and decay. Vegetation that had been systematically controlled during centuries of occupation begins sprouting from cracks in stone walls and pavement joints. Root systems gradually displace elements while creating new structural stresses that accelerate deterioration. Wildlife returns to areas that had been densely populated, transforming urban spaces into forest habitats within decades of abandonment. Intellectual continuity faces severe challenges as the social institutions that had preserved and transmitted knowledge dissolve under political pressure and economic necessity. The palace school closes permanently, its educational functions relocating to smaller, more sustainable institutions in the new capital. Monastery schools reduce their programs to essential religious instruction, while abandoning broader educational activities that had distinguished earlier periods. Oral traditions assume greater importance as written culture declines with the dispersal of scribal communities and the loss of institutional support for literary activities. International recognition of the transition occurs gradually as foreign courts adjust their diplomatic relationships to reflect changed regional realities. Chinese officials formally acknowledge Ayutthaya's dominant position while maintaining ceremonial respect for imperial excellence. Islamic traders redirect their commercial networks toward Thai ports, while preserving business relationships with merchants who relocate to accommodate new circumstances. The process demonstrates how political transformation can occur through recognition and accommodation instead of formal treaty arrangements. The legacy question becomes paramount as contemporary observers recognize they are witnessing the end of a civilization that had reached unprecedented heights in construction, hydraulic engineering, and administrative sophistication. Chinese visitors, like Zhou Daguan, had recorded detailed descriptions of the capital's magnificence at its peak, creating documentary evidence of excellence that would otherwise survive only in stone monuments. These accounts become invaluable historical sources as living memory of the empire's golden age disappears with the generation that had experienced it directly. Structural survival depends primarily on the inherent durability of stone construction and the scattered efforts of religious communities that maintain minimal presence at major sites. The Great Temple Complex, the supreme expression of classical imperial architecture, benefits from its religious significance to Buddhist practitioners who continue conducting ceremonies despite the absence of royal patronage. The temple's massive scale and superior construction enable it to withstand tropical conditions better than smaller, less well-built structures that rapidly succumb to vegetation and weather damage. The rediscovery narrative begins during the colonial period, as French explorers seeking commercial opportunities encounter ruins that exceed anything they had imagined possible in Southeast Asian contexts. Henri Moreau's accounts, published in European journals during the 1860s, introduce Western audiences to building excellence that challenges prevailing assumptions about Asian civilizations. These publications initiate scholarly interest that eventually evolves into systematic archaeological investigation and conservation efforts. Scientific archaeology transforms understanding of imperial civilization as systematic excavation and analysis reveal the sophistication of engineering, administrative, and artistic excellence. The decipherment of Sanskrit and vernacular inscriptions provides detailed information about political history, religious practices, and social organization that supplements structural evidence. Modern survey techniques reveal the extent of urban development and hydraulic infrastructure that had been concealed by centuries of vegetation growth. Conservation challenges emerge as international recognition of the site's significance creates obligations to preserve treasures for future generations. The tropical climate that had facilitated the monument's creation also threatens their long-term survival through constant exposure to humidity, temperature variations, and biological agents. Tourism development generates revenues that can fund conservation efforts, but also creates new pressures from visitor traffic and commercial development. Balancing preservation requirements with economic opportunities becomes an ongoing challenge for contemporary Cambodia. UNESCO World Heritage designation in 1992 formalizes international recognition of universal significance while establishing frameworks for collaborative conservation efforts. The designation acknowledges that these works represent humanity's common heritage instead of merely national property. International funding and expertise supplement local resources while respecting Cambodian sovereignty over conservation decisions and tourism development policies. Modern Cambodian identity incorporates the ancient capital as a symbol of national capability and excellence that transcends immediate political circumstances. The temples appear on the national flag and currency as reminders that contemporary challenges exist within historical contexts of remarkable accomplishment. Educational curricula emphasize the engineering and artistic excellence that demonstrates Cambodian contributions to world civilization. Political rhetoric invokes the empire's legacy to inspire confidence in national potential, while acknowledging the work required to achieve sustainable development. The broader significance of imperial civilization extends beyond monuments to encompass innovations in hydraulic engineering, administrative organization, and synthesis that influenced regional development for centuries. The irrigation techniques pioneered at the capital provided models for agricultural intensification throughout Southeast Asia. The governmental structures that managed diverse populations across vast territories demonstrated possibilities for political organization that transcended ethnic and religious boundaries. The artistic excellence that combined Indian influences with local traditions created distinctive forms that continue influencing regional aesthetic development. Contemporary lessons from the empire's rise and decline offer insights relevant to modern challenges of environmental management, political integration, and preservation. The sophisticated water management systems that supported unprecedented urban development demonstrate both the possibilities and the vulnerabilities inherent in intensive resource utilization. The administrative innovations that enabled effective governance across diverse populations provide examples of institutional flexibility and accommodation. The artistic excellence that synthesized influences from across Asia while maintaining distinctive identity illustrates possibilities for creative adaptation that respects both tradition and innovation. Historical perspective reveals that the empire's 6th-century duration represents remarkable longevity for any political organization, while its accomplishments in architecture, engineering, and administration establish permanent contributions to human civilization. The empire's eventual decline reflects universal challenges of maintaining complex institutions across extended periods instead of unique failures of vision or capability. Its legacy persists not merely in stone monuments, but in the demonstration that human creativity and organizational skill can achieve results that inspire wonder and respect across centuries and cultures. The temples still rise toward heaven, while the stones continue singing of glory that transformed ancient dreams into enduring reality. The great temple stands as proof that human devotion, guided by spiritual vision and sustained by practical wisdom, can create works worthy of the gods themselves. The monsoons return each year to nourish the forest that has reclaimed much of the ancient capital, but they also water the rice paddies where descendants of the empire's builders continue the agricultural traditions that sustained 6 centuries of unprecedented civilization. In the end, the empire reached its most important victory, not through territorial conquest or monumental grandeur, but through the demonstration that human societies can transcend immediate limitations to create beauty, knowledge, and institutions that enrich life for generations beyond their creators' lifespans. The echo of that excellence resonates still, calling contemporary humanity to similar dedication in service of ideals that exceed individual mortality, while honoring the creative potential that distinguishes our species among all earthly creatures.